Great, thank you. Change of scenery today. I prefer it in here. I have delusions of grandeur in the other room. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Children and Young People Scrutiny Commission meeting this evening. This is a formal meeting of Hackney Council, and all the usual constitutional requirements of council meetings apply. Can I remind members and officers that this meeting is being held in public and is being broadcast live via the internet. The rights of the press and public to record and film the meeting apply, and everyone present should note that media representatives may be in attendance or viewing the live stream. So item 1, apologies for absence. Do I have apologies for absence? I think we've got Councillor Ross and...
Councillor Midnight Ross, Councillor Caroline Solomon, Councillor Leela Dax Scott, Councillor Who's connecting virtually, and is Thelma Kensal.
And Sudanesh as well. Yeah. So welcome to those of you joining online. So item 2, urgent items. So we don't have any urgent items. Order of business is as set out. Moving on to item 3, declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations of interest? Anya first, please. Oh, sorry, Councillor Sizer.
Mother of a special needs child in the borough.
Thank you. Selma? I think you might be on mute if you're speaking.
Yep, I work for a children's centre in the borough.
Great, thank you very much, both. Jo?
Mother of a child with additional needs and school government.
Thank you, Jo. So moving on to our first substantive item for this evening, which is the SEND Partnership Action Plan. The SEND strategy for Hackney was agreed by Cabinet in October 2022. To support the delivery of key priorities within this strategy, a SEND Partnership Action Plan has been developed by local education, health and social care services. Members are invited to scrutinise delivery plans and to question officers present. And for this item, we've got quite a few people this evening. We've got Paul Senior, the Director of Education and Inclusion. We've got Nick Wilson, Head of High Needs and School Places. Jo Wilson, Head of SEND. Sarah Darcy, Strategic Lead for Children and Young People, NHS North East London. Steve Jahoda, Head of Disabled Children's Services. And Diane Benjamin, the Director of Children's Social Care. Do we have anybody else? Have I missed anybody? No. Great. So we've got 50 minutes for this item. As we have leads from education, health and social care here tonight, it would be good to hear from you all at the outset. So perhaps just setting out key aspects of the action plan for your respective areas and some reflections on the opportunities and challenges you foresee. So should we start with Paul for education, please?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Colleagues, the SEND strategy, the local area SEND strategy, it's not the local authority SEND strategy, it's the local area, because it cuts across the work of education, health and care. It looks at how effectively the local area, with the support of its partners, are actually progressing and implementing the work of the SEND reforms from 2014. So this isn't just about education, health and care plans, this is about access to specialist provision, this is access to all forms of a continuum of support, how well local area partners do work together. So as the chair set out, the strategy in itself has been ratified by Cabinet last year. So now what we have before us today is the implementation. It sets out the key priorities and the strategic aims for how local area partners are going to work together with a view to improving the outcomes for children and young people with SEND aged 0 to 25. So I'm really encouraged that we have representation from education, health and care partners tonight to talk about different aspects of the system. So there's lots of activity going on in this space, and I'm sure colleagues will want to hear from education, health and care partners. But just to kick off, I'd like to introduce or ask Nick, the Assistant Director for High Needs and School Places. Nick oversees a lot of our work in this space, but then I'd also welcome bringing in Sarah from a health perspective. And also Stephen Jahoda. Stephen joins us from Children's Social Care as well, just to really get a feel for the partnership perspective. So, Nick.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. Hi, I'm Nick Wilson. I'm interim AD for High Needs and School Places. So just before you on the plan, this plan was developed to address the SEND strategy that was ratified by the council, but also to pick up the peer review that took place in July 2022 by two experienced colleagues. One, there was a special special needs, special schools head teacher, former head teacher, and secondly, an Ofsted inspector. They identified 10 areas that we needed to focus on over a 3-year period. And what we have done in the plan is try to reference the strategy, reference our last inspection, which was 2017, and also take on board what our peer review colleagues were saying of us. Broadly, they said there's a lot of activity going on in the borough. Lots of good activity, lots of good practice, lots of things that are making an impact on the lived experience of children and families. However, this was not as effectively coordinated as it should be. So shortly after the peer review, we went about putting together a plan that was to coordinate these activities right across our partner organisations, not make it a local authority plan, but make it a local area plan that brought on board social care and health colleagues, and to look at the outcomes we wanted to achieve, those lived experience, those impactful conversations we want to have, and our commissioning of services to make that happen. So the plan is still in draft form. It has to be ratified again by the local area partnership and its governing body to make sure that the actions that we have identified, the outcomes that we want to see, are achievable and can be delivered within the timescales that we've set. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, from a health perspective.
Thank you. I hope this action plan really reflects that we are already a really strong SEND partnership across Hackney with all of our partners. And I think we're building on a way in which we work together as a partnership as partners for quite some time now. So we have the way in which we work from an NHS perspective in terms of children and young people and families commissioning is as part of an integrated work stream with our education and social care partners. So we're very much coming to you know, continuing to strengthen and develop our SEND work together through that lens. I think I want to pick out 2 or 3 particular areas. I should preface by saying that health are actively involved throughout the action plan, so all of the different work streams, and I think that's every element is relevant to education, health and social care, and we are all very, very clear about that. Hearing the voice of the child, hearing feedback from families, our focus on co-production. I hope you can see that throughout all of the plan, and that's a priority for all of us as partners. Similarly, the way in which we develop our quality assurance processes, when we're looking at the quality of EHC plans, when we're looking at the quality of information that's out there for families around our pathways, around our service offers. All of these are priorities that we share, and we continue to look at how we can do all of these elements of work together rather than one element of the system focusing on one area of the plan or one area of development. I think particularly in relation to health, the way in which we really are committed to bringing together our view of standards, waiting times across the system in relation to SEND is particularly important, and that's in the context of significant capacity and demand issues that we're all feeling throughout the SEND system. And so particularly when we're talking about some of our health pathways, whether that's CAMS, whether that's ASD, I'm sure we'll go on to talk about some of these areas. We're very much really trying to achieve a system view, a system response in a way in which we can work together with our parent carer representatives, our education, health and social care colleagues to deliver improvements.
Thank you, Sarah. And to complete the statutory partner part of this process, Stephen, is there anything from a children's social care perspective that you'd like to add that's not been added or shown so far from our health or education colleagues?
Thanks, Paul. I think a lot of it's been covered in terms of the kind of priorities for the plan. From a children's services perspective, I think a big emphasis would be on the kind of streamlining of the joint working approach, which seems to have really taken shape, I think, in recent kind of months. And also, I suppose, one thing to mention on a children's services perspective as well as the development of the Early Help Hub, which I think is really kind of helping to bring together the kind of joint working across the different work streams and thinking about how best we kind of meet the needs of children and ensure that the right services for the children and families that we're working with.
Thank you, Stephen. So, colleagues, I'm going to take it that colleagues have seen the report and the paper, how it sets out the key priorities, the strategic aims, the progress against that, the milestones, timescales, and gives an overview. We're also supported here by Joe Wilson from the local authority, who's our head of SEND, and also Diane Benjamin, who's the Director for Children's Social Care as well, which Stephen's portfolio sits within as well. So in terms of breadth of representation here, to illustrate the strength of partnership, I think you can see there's quite a commitment this evening. Thank you. And actually, obviously, the most important person, our portfolio holder, Councillor Woodley, overseeing the work is SEND as well. So I think you can see the strength of partnership and commitment to working today. And naturally, the work of schools we have, it's great that we've got school colleagues on the panel as well, because they're an important partner here, ultimately, who support our children and young people on a daily basis. And lots of our services and support for children and young people with SEND goes through our schools as well. So I think we've got, when we talk about SEND, it is a broad church in terms of the reach, the support that goes on as well. And with over 3,000 children locally having that form of education, health and care plan as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you to everybody who's spoken so far. In terms of questions, I think we're going to separate them into the first set of questions will be more broad questions from the Commission, then we'll move on to the individual work streams, if that's okay. So over to the Commission, if anybody wants to kick us off with any questions.
Chair, could I?
Councillor Susarunga, and then can we have 2 questions each, if that's okay? Make sure you've got your pens handy, and I'll try to be strict about more questions than one. So Councillor Susarunga, over to you.
I wanted to just start with a general governance question, and thank you for the very nicely presented strategy. I wanted to ask, who is on the SEND strategy board? How inclusive? How will they report? And supplementary question, who is in the SEND strategy program team? And what is their reporting regime? And how does the dynamic between the two, how does the operation between the SEND strategy board and the SEND transformation program team work?
And then Councillor Tevitt-Dilloff, please, and then.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation and your explanations, your contributions today. It's really helpful. I would like to check a couple of things. And it's to do with the action plan. One is it attracted my attention, work stream. I'm going to go straight to that work stream, if that's okay, about aligning systems and processes for transition to adulthood. I'm a mental health champion for Hackney, and practitioner for many years, and very concerning time for transitioning to healthy adulthood for children and young people with needs is understanding where they have this holistic approach. So I wanted to find out a bit more of what does that approach entails that will give us an understanding as to what would be that outcome in terms of that work stream. And the next point is, because you talked about waiting times, it would be good to understand as well what those waiting times are looking like. And very lastly, because I work largely with communities that only speak English, what is the support for those families that only speak English in that part? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Quite a few pointed questions there. We'll endeavour to respond as effectively as possible. I'm going to talk about the SEND Partnership Board representation. Transformation Board, is that one you or Joe could be able to talk about? Stephen, positions, would you be in a position just to give some headlines on that?
I think there'll be more for the follow-up questions about preparation.
Yeah, is that okay?
Yeah,
that's great. And then Sarah, could you do the one about access to waiting times and all of that stuff? That's okay. On the partnership board, there's statutory partners are represented across education, health and care. And we have good representation from partners across education, health and care, as well as schools and settings, as well as provider services, as well as commissioner services. So there's quite a broad range. And And dare I say, the SEND Partnership Board, probably in excess of about 20 people. We also have representation from the our Parent Carer Forum, as is at the moment as well. So it's actually quite broad in terms of representation. And I suppose the last time I went to the SEND Partnership Board, there was over 20 folk there, so it was incredibly well attended. So in terms of compliance with the requirements of having a SEND Partnership Board, actually Hackney discharges its duties in that regard quite effectively. We've recently put in place a new executive board, if you like, to have oversight to really enable the decision-making process as well. My view when I started was I felt the partnership board was important because it showed the breadth of engagement and consultation and communication and bringing folk together. Either the shorter, smaller, more executive group that actually could have oversight of the resources that we have as a local area, the priorities that we have as a local area with a focus on SEND, but also the strategic risks as well. So that was important to have an executive. So when I think of my time in recent years working in be it local government or national government, I would consistently feel the most successful local areas in discharging their duties strategically and operationally regarding SEND have been those ones where they've streamlined in terms of decision making. So you've got an executive, then you've got a partnership board, then you've got the work streams underneath, which is something we put in place. So a simple answer to your simple question is we have the statutory partners, we have providers in place. Nick, can you talk about the transformation part of the process?
Certainly. So on page 19 of the pack and page 4 of the plan is a pictorial about a SEND transformation governance structure, which is in draft form at the moment. And part of the strength of what we're trying to do with the plan is put everything in one place. There are a number of plans around organisations, and what we were trying to do is make sure that we had a wired diagram that people could understand where the governance and oversight was actually placed. So at the moment, this is a draft document, and you will see on the green what we are looking for is where does that oversight happen at partnership level, whether it's the safeguarding board, which there is some oversight, whether there's health and wellbeing board, the Hackney schools board, and other relevant boards and commissions. And then through the other side, the purple side is, the orange side shows the structure that is in place within Hackney Council as one of its statutory partners, so which will cover both social care and also education. We haven't yet mapped up the health wiring diagram, but we will soon to do that. And part of that picture as well is to show the prominence of parental steering groups and also the voice of children and young people and the 10 work streams and the outcomes that we want to achieve to that.
Thank you. I find simple questions and simple answers are always the best. So thank you very much for that. Very informative.
You're welcome. Stephen, the parent level.
Yeah, I suppose there's the main kind of forum for the alignment of preparing young people for adulthood is we have a monthly meeting where we have partners from across education, health, the children's services. We have representation from CAMS as well, and CAMS Disability, where all young people from the age of 16 upwards who are likely to require a transition, we would bring young people to that meeting and have the conversations about what their needs might entail, what kind of support plan we might have for them in the future, and think about, you know, what the pathway might look like for them and how that transition work will take place. There's also now an adults team, a preparation for adulthood team in the adult services, which is specifically for young people from age of 18 to 25, but they also do a lot of that work for 16 and 17-year-olds as well, and they're a main point of contact for our services when we're thinking about that transition process. So I think that would be the kind of key areas that we're thinking about, unless there's anything from colleagues to...
No, just to say, it's probably fair to say we've got a well-established pathway and it absolutely seems to be working. I think there are challenges with everything that we do, but I think certainly our bit of the world in terms of that social care element, it absolutely seems to be working. We've got join up and sign up with all our partners. So I think that multi-agency working seems to be really, really effective.
Okay, we have a query from...
I'm going to ask, can I ask a follow-up question? Was yours a follow-up question? Yes. Okay, I'll let you go first in that case.
I was just going to ask how you would promote that towards young people, because I am a 17-year-old with autism. I haven't heard of that program. I actually wanted to know if you'd be able to, maybe it's more centered towards children who are lower down the spectrum, but how would you promote it to people who are autistic but might not be always at those meetings? Would you go through schools? Would you go through like the council? How would you make it more known to people that they could go and have these transition topics?
Can I just take another couple of questions and then I'll hand over to you again? And this is somewhat connected, but sort of opens another discussion topic potentially, and that's around data. So from the Commission's previous work on SENS, there was a broad consensus, I think, among partners that service planning was not sufficiently data-driven, and that a more developed and critical understanding of data was needed to better assess the local need to inform commissioning. I can see that that's clearly an ambition in the action plan for sure. And I just wanted to know, is the SEND team and wider partnership confident that local SEND data systems and processes can deliver the information needed to develop and improve SEND provision? And sort of connected, how I'm making that very tenuous link is to do with the post-16 provision quite specifically, because we'd done a piece on that as a commission where we'd set out some recommendations around that. And it didn't feel as though those recommendations were necessarily reflected in workstream 5. And they were sort of quite clearly identified challenges. So I'm just wondering, are we going to see that sort of development from the action plan in terms of what we had heard through that piece of work? You know, children and families wanted to see in terms of.
Chair, before we answer that, I'm mindful that our colleague has not yet had a response to her question about waiting times and access to specialist health services. Is it okay if we answer that first of all before we, just to get our sequencing right? Otherwise,
Sure.
the changes will answer
Sure.
that, Chair, and we'll miss out the
Sure.
question that our colleague has answered. So there's something about sequencing. So
Language.
yeah. So I'm thinking, Sarah, access to specialist health services, waiting times.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
And if I may also, just in terms of transition or preparing for adulthood in terms of health, there are quite well established pathways across a number of our community health services with Ahometans. So I'm thinking about therapies and also CAMS, about their very specific pathways of support that they have for preparing for adulthood. I think the challenge for us, as across many of these work streams, is really us mapping all of the good practice that's happening across the system and being really clear where the gaps are and bringing that together, and from that emerges, or we co-produce our strategy about how we're going to strengthen that very consistently. So I think that's kind of reflects our approach that we're very much attempting to undertake across the system. So in terms of our waiting times, again, going back to us really trying to have more of a system approach to much of this. So we have an emotional health and wellbeing partnership board now, which is separate to, but absolutely works very much with our SEND partnership board. We've got a lot of cross membership, and through that emotional health and wellbeing board, which is chaired by Jackie Burke, our group director, we're very much looking at the pressures for families and across the system. So thinking about our CAMS waiting times and so on. What we don't have at the moment is a really robust data dashboard of what our waiting times are, and we have to be very open about that, because that is the position. There's a lot of work going on around reviewing and strengthening our we do have a CAMS dashboard, but we are looking at ensuring that it meets the needs of our local partnership. So there's a lot of development work happening there. And then as part of the action plan, I think it's workstream 3, we're very much focused on building up our performance dash as an integrated partnership with a focus on SEND, so that we have that transparency about waiting times. I think it's one of your QAs later on, but just a bit of a correction to our documentation, in that there's not a concern about our speech and language therapy waiting times currently. They are comparably good. There is always more for us to do to strengthen our offers, but speech and language therapy is not of particular concern. We know that we've got long waiting times for autism assessments. So we have a 0 to 5 pathway and a 5+ pathway, and you're looking at approximately 12 to 13 months at the moment. there, which again, we're not an outlier. I'm not saying in any way that is good enough. Mental health, I don't have a breakdown of waiting times to give you. I know you've got a scrutiny focus on this in April. We can certainly come back to you and share some more data in the interim if that's helpful. But again, whether it's ASD, whether it's CAMS, our focus as a partnership is very much thinking about, again, linking with our graduated approach. It's around what is the support we're putting in place at the point that needs are identified. We don't want to wait for a diagnosis. So there's a lot of work going on at the moment around what's our pre-diagnostic support, what's the support for families when their child is on a waiting list. Again, that work isn't complete. We've got a lot of work to do. But again, that's a real priority of our partnership, and hopefully you can see that through the action plan.
Sarah, thank you. And I echo Sarah's comments that in recent times we've put together the SEND Executive Board and the work of the Partnership Board, and we're very much looking at performance as well. So when we talk about data, Chair, are we talking specifically about needs assessment data? Are you talking about performance data? What specifically do you feel are the data shortcomings?
So yeah, that was I suppose for the action plan, and I accept that this is probably because it's still in draft form. But if we are to look at it in a year's time, how are we measuring success? What does that look like?
Success criteria.
Yes, success criteria. So what's the baseline at the moment? What are we hoping to achieve? What are we, and I think it was sort of a bit of a muddled question that I'd asked about the post 16 and the link between the two. But for us, that piece of work illuminated some very specific things that families said that they felt would make a difference to them in terms of the development of SEND provision. But without the detail, I suppose, qualitative or quantitative, then it's quite difficult for us to know whether we feel that we're succeeding. Okay. So it's the detail, I suppose.
Yeah, because colleagues do have across education, health and care significant. We now have plenty of scorecard data. So, for example, I met with my internal team and at the council today with a focus on SEND. So, for example, education, health and care plans. The only national indicator set for SEND is the 20-week performance. How we produce 20-week plans, and the performance of the team is in excess of 60%, which I think the national average at the moment is 54%. So we're comparing quite favourably with the national average, but it's still not good enough. We have an ambition to go as high as we can do. So whether we get to 80, 90 to 100%, but performance in the national indicator set compares quite favourably. We know we're issuing 5.3% of the local child population with a statutory education, health and care plan. The Pan London average is 4.4%. So in terms of, we know we're issuing more plans than across our data set as well. But if we're being quite clear about progress against baseline, so this committee can have an overview of how are we doing, how do we know, and how do we compare. Absolutely make it something we work into the work plan and actually come back with a scorecard against these objectives. Today has been about showing, if you like, the implementation plan in a draft format, but you're absolutely right. How do we know we're actually making a difference and impacting? We want to be able to see some key performance indicators in there. So I think it's not untoward to say perhaps in the not too distant future, once this has been through the executive board and ratified and all of that stuff converted into a formal plan, then we'll be looking at a scorecard to look at these measures as well, and it's something we'll be able to bring back in not too distant future, Chair.
And just to clarify, are we talking about the data that we're capturing will be like of more sort of national significance? We'll be looking at it against, are we setting any local targets in relation to anything that we're going to be aiming to capture?
Will it be important that we benchmark, that Hackney benchmarks against its data set, so local authorities with a similar demographic profile? Yes, we get the national comparison data, but I always think it's more appropriate to benchmark against our inner London partners and other local areas with a similar data set. So it's, the three questions when I used to inspect local areas and schools, I would always wanted answering: how are we doing, which is performance; how do we know, which is evidence; and how do we compare, which is benchmarking. And I'm sure our KPIs and our scorecard will be able to answer those three questions, these categories, Chair.
Thank you very much. And I think Mia's question, I'm not sure who's going to answer that. Mia's question around people, the awareness of, yeah.
I was asking how you would plan to promote your it was the like transition to adulthood plan.
Sure.
You said you were working with a number of people to get it going and it was really successful. But I was just talking from a personal experience of being 17 and having autism and not having heard of it. So I do go to an academy, but I was wondering how you would plan to go and promote it to the youth in general. I do know it's Autism Week coming up, so I was wondering if you'd do anything with that.
Okay, so who'd like to?
So I think
take that one on?
specifically when we were talking about pathways, we were talking about internal meetings, unfortunately, in terms of the meetings that we have as officers. But absolutely a good question in terms of how would you now, where's the reach for you? And I don't know, Paul, whether, it is in schools, whether head teachers have that knowledge, their understanding of the said pathways, etc. So maybe that's something for us to think about.
I think, I think we mustn't just rely on one way of communicating with our young people and families. So I think that's that we've obviously got to have that consistency. So we obviously have the local offer website. We have our developing parent carer forum and the many community groups that we work with and who are really important for that two-way communication. We've got a lot of work happening in terms of pupil voice, so our work in schools, and that's really developed a lot over the last few months and will continue to do so. So we've got a direct way in which we can ask pupils, actually, what information do you need? Is this in a helpful format? And really work with in developing that jointly. So I think there need to be lots of different strands of it. And I think that's when you look at the action plan and you see the fact that we know we need a stronger, robust, co-produced strategy around preparing for adulthood. Communication is a key part of it.
And you've teed it up incredibly nicely, Sarah. I'd like to bring in Joe, our head of SEND, to talk about pupil voice a little bit more. Joe?
Thanks, Paul. So it's a really good question. I think it's really important for us that we promote our pupil voice work as much as possible. So we've got a really helpful pupil forum running now, but we're trying to recruit more young people to our forum. So there's about 30 members at sometimes, and we know that could get a lot bigger. And what we're asking our young people to do is think about what we've been discussing in forum meetings and take them back to your school and form your own student councils around SEND. And we see that as a really good way of our young people helping us to get the word out there about all the different things we're doing. We're also having employment fairs and preparing for adulthood fairs as well. So we had the first one last year at one of our local schools, but this year we're hoping that we can have something for the whole of Hackney, so we can really get the message out about what's available for our young people.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. I think, Joe, and then I think Councillor Charlton, had you put your hand up?
When we finish on this topic.
Okay.
Just a very quick follow-up to that, actually, just about people not falling through the gaps. It would be really great to have something systemically in place so every SEND child is, tick, have they had some kind of post-16 pathway presented to them? It's clearly happening quite successfully for those children who are within the social care system. I don't know what proportion, for example, of children with EHCPs are also in the social care system and how many aren't. And then we've also got all the children who don't have an EHCP, who are on SEND support, whose driver and what's happening to those. It probably happens mostly in a school, but I feel like, where's the oversight? How are we checking that families aren't falling through the gaps?
Yeah, and I think it's easier for children and young people with EHC plans because there's the Year 9 review, which is a statutory transition review where we'll talk about PFA and we'll talk about the future. The SEND support, that's not statutory. So what we'd say to schools is really good practice to do that. But there's probably some work for us in promoting that to all of our settings.
And also, do we follow up that all of those Year 9 statutory reports actually happen? Because anecdotally, I mean, we know that huge capacity workload issue about those sort of annual reviews and those sessions and whether they're actually happening.
And that's, I think, you touched on a point that's sort of coming through for me a bit, I suppose, and that is just thinking about the work that we've done with parents. I think it is very much about that voice as well, and I think that's what I was maybe getting at when I was asking about whether we're setting any local targets that are responding to what families and children are telling us their experience of our services, and whether there is any sort of means to be able to sort of have to consider that as part of the action plan, that the work that we're doing with the parent and carer voice and the youth voice, whether it is about ensuring that the action plan is actually achieving what we're saying we're hoping to achieve for those families, whether that is actually their experience of it. Because I think that what sometimes gets lost in the data, the national data, is it's maybe too general and doesn't speak to the experiences of families.
The voice of parents and children and young people is so crucial, Chair. And I know our colleagues who have been shaping and designing the work of the strategy, parent voice has been an important part in shaping that. And one of the priorities here is about the work with Parent Carer Forum to ensure that our parents are involved in shaping and designing this agenda going forwards. And we're going through a process at the moment. We're commissioning a new organisation to lead the parent carer voice space in Hackney, and the voice of our young people. Nick, from memory, I think we're looking to bring some young people to one of our SEND Partnership Board meetings.
We are. These are groups that are within the further education world, and they've asked to come and address the board, and we're trying to facilitate that at the moment.
So full agreement on the principle, Chair. Absolutely. In terms of our young people and our parents, we're very keen to get them inside the tent in terms of helping us to shape and design, because we do believe in the principles of co-production. So it's important that we're making sure we're engaging as many stakeholders and partners as possible. I mean, Sarah, from our perspective, we do a lot of work in that space as well, don't we?
Yeah, we do. We have a programme called System Influencers. It's not SEND specific, but it's the way in which we're trying to build on our own, I suppose, our health approach, building on the legacy of the Young Futures Commission, all of the Young Black Men's work around working with a group of young people on a topic that's of interest to them, that is really important to them, and about them helping co-produce, whether it's a policy, an engagement approach, whatever it is. So we've got a number of system influencers working with us at the moment on a number of different topics. We've also slightly different agenda, but all of these kind of intersect with SEND around family hubs, super youth hubs. And we've got about 16 young people now who are going to be working with us on the development of our super youth hubs. So absolutely everything we're doing, we're really trying to move forward, both with our parent care representatives and hearing the voice of the young people.
Thank you, Sarah. And Stephen, from a children with disabilities team perspective, I know again, young person voice is very important with what you do.
Yeah, I think probably the youth hubs, as Sarah's spoken about, are the kind of key aspect of that. We are looking to build up more through our short breaks service, which does have we've got 1,900 children linked in with that short break service, and we're thinking about at the moment how we can do more community outreach. We've spoken out to a lot of the different voluntary sector organisations in Hackney to think about making sure they're represented in the sections of the community that they speak to are involved, but also thinking about how we can. I think pre-COVID we had things that were happening and that's kind of fallen by the wayside. So it's about how we can kind of start having some more representation of children through those processes, and looking at kind of through the short breaks forum, having more contact with children and getting their experiences. Almost a significant portion of those accessing short breaks are also SEND children as well. So thinking about how that can kind of work across both services.
Thank you very much. I've got some questions from people joining us virtually. So Sudanese, Councillor Sizer, and then Salma, please.
Okay, so before I ask my question, I thought I'd introduce myself quickly. My name is Sudanese Top. I'm the member of Youth Parliament for Hackney. I'm also the young mayor of Hackney. So my question was for the cabinet member that responded to Mia's question. You said that there were, you spread the information about SEND support to young people through school councils. and also through like fairs and things like that. As a person who didn't really have a school council when I was in school, what else could you do for students and young people to find out about the support that the council is giving? Because, you know, not every school has a school council, so they may not hear about these fairs, or they may not hear about this from their school either. I would suggest you get involved, you know, Hackney Youth Parliament, because we work with young people and we spread these messages. So like, I was just suggesting that, but if there's any other things that you're planning to do, please let me know.
Before you come back on that, can we get Anya and then Salma? Thank you, Sudhanis.
Yeah, it was a question about Workstream 7, CPD. I've looked through the report and I can't see much mention of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. I do see mention of autism and other forms of SEN, but I can't really see a focus on that. And the latest research says that incidence of FASD is around 3.5% as opposed to autism, which is around 1 to 2%. So even, and that's across the UK, within Hackney, it's more likely to be higher than that. And the numbers are skewed anyway because they don't take into account children with EHCPs already. So it's a plea really that we really firmly put FASD on the CPD track. And I'd love to hear what's being done around that. Thank you.
Can we just take one last question from Salma, please?
Hi, so my question was really a follow-up. I think Mia asked, somebody asked this earlier about having information in different languages, where, you know, language is a big barrier for many of the families who access services in Hackney, and what are we doing about that? I agree with Sudhanis about, you know, promoting the work to the community through different services such as youth services and the community and voluntary sector. I currently host a parent forum with HIP in our community centre. It's widely attended by parents, you know, where English is second language, and it's one of the main reasons why they attend, because it's an alternative way of, you know, accessing services, different means, you know, and we have people from outside of the borough attending as well. So yeah, just to follow up about how much work you're doing in the community to promote the work, especially with the pupil voice work.
Thank you very much.
Okay, well, colleagues, I think there are a few questions there with regards to the role of the youth council. I absolutely agree with. I'm sure we'd want to strengthen and reach out and strengthen our links with the youth council. And much as we say that we're working with or trying to extend the remit of children and young people with SEND, working closely with the organisation, but if there's a willingness from the youth council to engage, it would be an own goal not to engage with the youth council as part of this process. We do have lots of good information on the local offer website, which I'm sure colleagues are cited on, and our schools are providing some first-class information, advice and guidance as well for parents, children, young people with SEND, but we'd always know it doesn't always go far enough, so we could always do more, absolutely. So working with the youth council, I'm sure if I'm sure we can make something happen in that space. Again, just to help push the messaging out. Fetal alcohol disorder, I mean, our colleagues have gone through a carefully evaluated process of engaging partners across education, health and care, and also the input of parents and carers through the work of the Hackney, what's HIP stand for? Independent Parents Panel, was it?
Hackney Independent Parents.
That's it. So parents have played a role in shaping and designing the priorities that we're working on, but we realise it doesn't always go far enough. So it's important that we continuously look at the need. What's the need locally? What does the data tell us about the resource we have, and what are our priorities for the resources that we have? And it's continuously evaluating that assessment of need. Sarah, from a health perspective, I know that in the health system that you go through significant, robust levels of making those tough decisions. What's the priority? What's the need? What's the resource we've got? And it's that process of evaluation, and all of this mixes up into our strategies, because our strategic priorities are only ever informed by local assessments and need. From a health perspective. So what type of assessment and the process would the organisation go through to reach those conclusions? What should be our priorities?
Well, I think we have our joint strategic needs assessments, so I think that's the the standard process we go through. I'm not aware of this cohort in terms of the size of the cohort, in terms of Hackney, so I'm sorry that I can't respond directly to that, but I will certainly take that away, review our needs assessment, discuss with our public health colleagues. So thank you for flagging this particular group of children and families.
Absolutely. If there's a gap in what we're doing, we're absolutely keen to hear on that. But we're evidence-based, we're needs-led, we're outcomes-focused. We go where the data takes us, and if the data takes us to a place that this is something that needs to be a priority locally, if it's evidence-based, then it's something we'll look at very, very seriously. But as I said, we have a partnership board which has representation across education, health care and parents, schools and settings, so it's quite broad in its representation, but as I say, no process is ever perfect. Joe, thinking around the school councils and all of that stuff, and if it doesn't always go far enough, pupil voice, what's your thoughts on that?
I think we can definitely take it further, so yeah, it's a really helpful suggestion.
Okay, thank you, Joe.
I've got plugs.
Come on, Councillor Wood, you
Well,
go
we've
for
got
it.
Autism Acceptance Week. I think it's March 27th. So Lydia Scoletti's been circulating information about that. I'll make sure personally I get some information to Mia and Susan on that. Rhiannon Eglin, who's done a lot of work with Year 6 transition. I think the next event is in May for Year 6, and then she's planning a big summer forum. So if she's saying it's going to be a big summer forum, we need to make sure it is a big summer forum for children. And again, if Hackney Youth Parliament wants to get involved in that, I think that could help a lot. So Lydia and Rhiannon will be getting introduction emails from me to you in the coming week.
Thank you, Councillor Wood.
So Denise, did you want to come back in briefly, and then I'll take some more questions from the Commission?
Yeah, just a quick response. I mean, we did something for Local Democracy Week. It was amazing. We would love to do something for Autism Awareness Week as well. So yeah, we are looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got Councillor Binny Lubbock, Councillor Charlton, and Councillor Gordon, please.
Just going back to the point about parent and pupil voice. Obviously, it's important that the implementation plan responds to the needs of the Orthodox Jewish community, and obviously they represent have 1 in 5 of the young people locally, so it'll be an important part of that transformation. But there's very little mention of them specifically in the action plan, apart from one point about closing attainment gaps. So I'm just wondering what the overarching strategy for engaging and involving the Orthodox Jewish community is to support the implementation plan, the implementation of the action plan.
Can I just take another couple of questions, please? Councillor Charlton.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, my question is about finance. Do you want me to ask it now, or do you want me to wait until?
If it's better suited to the next item, then that would be helpful, please.
Well, it's around partnership.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm, with the central government funding reflecting the growing need for SEND services, how will the partnership ensure there are fair and transparent structures for supporting government investment to meet the often complex needs of SEND children? And what opportunities, if any, are there for relieving the pressure on the finance, that's created as a consequence of the partnership's existence? So how will it support, better use of resources, in other words?
Okay, can we talk about our engagement with the OJ community first and foremost, if that's okay, and then we'll talk about the financial question. Nick, we do a lot of work with the OJ community directly in terms of engagement. In fact, I've got the Interlink meeting this week myself, so I'm going to be visiting them and spending time with their schools and settings. And obviously during the holidays, we have the Holiday Activity Fund, where significant investment goes into that community to ensure that those children and young people are accessing meals and resources and things like that. And so we have targeted conversations with our colleagues in that part of the system to make sure that their needs are met as effectively as possible. And dare I say it, the engagement has to be, we're working with 32 independent schools because that community in the main fell, or make a choice not to engage with the maintained sector, so therefore it requires a bespoke, targeted approach. I'll give you an example recently where one of the provisions within the OJ community came under significant pressure because of a potential eviction. So we're in regular dialogue about the potential for alternative provision and alternative accommodation and things like that. We are in conversations about allocation of resources as well, and recently I approved a significant sum that was going to be made available to one provision as well. If the evidence is provided, if the data is provided, then we will find a way. A lot of the children and young people in that community, unfortunately, aren't coming through our formal approaches, which is through assessment, the 20-week education, health and care plan development, and therefore we allocate statutory resources, or they're not engaged in our system, which means they would go to our specialist provision, our special school provision as well. So we have to have alternative bespoke ways, which are underpinned by engagement as well. But lots of engagement activity from a leadership perspective, from a strategic and operational perspective as well. So lots of our officers are engaging it, but we can always go further. And we are engaging with other local areas with a similar demographic to us, maybe not on the same level as us, but Bury in Manchester, Salford in Manchester, Barnet as well. We have significant OJ communities who are engaging in similar programs as well, because we're always looking how to improve and strengthen the work that we do as well. Nick, as I said, the team have done a lot of engagement.
I think Joe's team support the Senko network. I think we need to hear the voice of the child from that community a little bit louder. And we have got, as Paul said, good engagement and a infrastructure to do that, and a support network for the Senko network within the independent schools in the borough. However, we're not yet, and we've regularly visiting the departments, the Senko departments, and also seeing some of the work that the children are engaged in at the moment, and also some of the support networks that are in place at the moment. However, we don't have a way at the moment in which we coordinate that, and that will be our next conversation with Interlink and our community links.
The finance question, I think we've got a finance paper coming up after this one with focus on education, and you'll see there's a big overspend in my budget because of SEND. So in terms of,
wondered how the partnership, would help improve that situation and certainly not make it worse.
Yeah, we're facing, it's a demand-led agenda, so we try not to let resources be a barrier to ensuring that the needs of children and young people have been met. Incredibly hard when you look on a national level. There was a £2.5 billion funding gap in the SEND space, and how you look at 141 out of 151 local areas nationally significantly overspent in that area. And when you look at local areas such as Kent, I think is £250 million overspent. Surrey, £150 billion overspent. There's some big numbers we're talking about. They're big numbers because the demand has gone up. I mentioned earlier how this local authority issues 5.3% of the local population with a statutory education, health and care plan. Last year that was 4.5%, the year before it's 3.8%, the year before it's 3.1%. 2014, when we were in the world of statements, before we got onto education, health and care plans, it's probably about 0.5%. The demand for accessing specialist specialist school provision has increased 65% since 2014. So you've seen the numbers go up and up and up and up and up. But this is about a national policy level agenda. Hence why the government have brought out, well, I say hence, I hope it is, we have to send an alternative provision green paper, which is working its way through the House of Parliament at the moment, with a view to changing things to hopefully give us a little bit more agency, help to drive down pressures, but also, again, making sure that services are more responsive to needs. So there are no easy answers there. Hackney has some big pressure problems there, as you've seen in the finance paper, but we have to continue to adapt and adjust in response to local needs. We have to try and strengthen capacity in our mainstream school system as well to be able to be better positioned to meet the needs of children and young people we send, to try and reduce the pressure on those who are going into special schools, and ultimately to reduce the pressure on children who are having to go into the independent non-maintained sector, where some of these placements can cost £250,000, £300,000 per year if there's a residential element thrown in as well. So cost pressures are significant in the SEND space. We don't have all the answers. We make sure that finance is not a barrier when it comes to meeting the needs of children and people, and ultimately it does cost. And I've not even spoken about transport costs as yet. Sarah, from a health perspective, is there anything you can kind of add to that?
I think, and again, hopefully you can see this through the action plan, that as a partnership, we're really committed to ensuring that children have their support and provision and care as close to home as possible. So all of the estate strategy around creating those additional specialist places in Hackney plays into that, doesn't it? And that in some ways creates other pressures or financial demands within the system, but they are, you know, they need to be met by the partnership. So I think that's really key part of it. And also all of our work around early help and prevention, all of that is around trying to identify needs as early as possible for that purpose. But, you know, actually then we anticipate that, you know, we get to a point where fewer children need to have an EHCP because they've had that, their needs have been identified earlier and they've had that earlier support, which then should play through on reducing costs across the system. So all of this kind of, you know, quality work that we're all really committed to, the intention is that it does have a positive impact on the financial situation
And
as
if
well.
I can just come in, I mean, our colleagues under Diane's jurisdiction really do invest in early help as a local area. We see that as a key priority because it's real short-sighted, but many years ago, not just many years ago, even up until this year, but local areas facing significant financial pressure have cut their early help services. Incredibly short-sighted because if you don't have that prevention, that early identification, that early intervention, that prevention at the foundational stage of the concern, well, guess what happens? You've got no prevention element. You go straight to the specialist element, which is very expensive. So I know, Diane, you and the team, there's lots of work in the early help space, which we hope to stop children and young people's needs escalating to that third tier.
I think we've probably got a few more questions before we move on. I know that Councillor Gordon has a question. We've probably have enough time for another 3 or so, perhaps. Councillor Gordon, and then Joe, please, and then Richard. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a question, but I just wanted to slightly follow up on the Orthodox Jewish community. I mean, it's obviously good to hear about engagements with the Orthodox Jewish community and acknowledgement there needs to be more engagement with young people from that community. Just really sort of picking up in relation to Councillor Conway's earlier comment about data. I wonder whether there's any specific data about that community, about how aware we are of the level of needs and whether there's any specific challenges across that community. I mean, obviously you have explained, you know, some of the sort of variation in sort of education system within that community, but I think it would be really good to have as much data as possible, really, and, you know, specific KPIs really in relation to, you know, to the SEND offer in that community. I mean, particularly about the attainment of SEND children in that community and how that compares with, you know, with the Hackney base and the rest of, you know, the national base as well. So if when we get our data, if there could be something that drills down into the Orthodox Jewish community, I think that would be really helpful for understanding how the offer works for that, you know, substantial and important part of our community. Sorry, that's coming on to my sort of more substantial question, was just really, I think maybe Joe's going to pick up on this as well, but just in terms of the workstream 4 and workstream 9, the school estate strategy and the ARP strategy. Just obviously it's really, you know, really welcome to see the school estate strategy and an additional 300 places children with SEND, but I just really wondered how confident we are that that's going to meet the future needs, and then just really sort of building on that about whether these future ARPs are going to be targeted in the schools and areas where they be most beneficial, where there's most need in terms of, you know, children and families travelling to them.
Okay. Joe, you okay to pick up the one about thing 4, if that's okay?
Yes.
Yeah. And Nick, ARPS?
I'll do estates and Joe does ARPS.
Yeah, is that okay?
Yeah.
I'll do the OJ community query. That's a really good one. Timely. We recently have what we call the annual engagement meeting with Ofsted. So that's with the Ofsted director for the the region, and they hold us to account for our systems and our processes, and they talk about the OJ community. And in terms of getting information and how do we ensure we have sufficient wraparound, because we do have good engagement, but in terms of access to the information as much as we want to from our maintained sector, there are challenges. And officers recognise that as a local authority, we actually go further than most in what we're doing in terms of engaging the OJ community, because the schools bill was going to help us significantly in terms of being able to bridge the gap, in terms of actually be able to use more methodology to engage with that community and get that community to be more engaged with our schools, and actually shut down unregistered education settings, which we do have a problem with in this borough. What Ofsted and the Department for Education in subsequent meetings have made very clear to us that our processes are actually robust and will stand up to the highest level of scrutiny. So our engagement in terms of the data set, it's very hard to engage that community on a data level if that data isn't available from their perspective. And the regulator has made very clear that we've gone as far as we can do. And we were reliant on the school bill to help us, but we're open-minded if it's felt that there are other methodologies that we could be deploying that we're not deploying. If Ofsted had told us, and the Department for Education have told us as well, if there's felt there are other processes that we could be deploying, I'm open-minded to how we go about collecting that data if the regulator has not added anything into the mix. Joe, do you want to come in on point 4?
I'm doing cool.
Yeah, go on,
yeah. So, do we think we are developing enough places for the demand that's currently in the system at the moment? I think we have right-sized the supply to the demand. But every year we do a needs analysis to say whether we are still on that trajectory. And there's two things that are pressing at the moment in our analysis. Is one, the level of falling roles within the borough at the moment, and whether that may dampen down some of the demand for education, health and care plans. Secondly, we have been really clear about our referral for assessment and assessment at the moment in plans. That is a more balanced approach to the planning of education, health and care plans that may well buy a few plans or go up or down depending on how that figures come through. But the programme at the moment in phase 1A and 1B are on schedule. We already have Simon Marks and Nightingale School, which are out for tender, and the building works will hopefully start on time. And 1B feasibility studies have been finished, and on the 2 we have actually scoped out 2 bits of land for potential of an annex to a special school or indeed a new special school. But we will keep under review the number of places that we need. However, we think it's right at the moment. We think the political commitment that we're aiming for, we're meeting that commitment at the moment, and we will review that on a yearly basis.
Thanks, Nick. I think it says in the action plan that ARPs developed organically across Hackney, and I think historically that was very much the situation that a school would have a will to open an ARP, and we go ahead and think actually we need some provision, so let's go ahead with it. What we're doing now is we're trying to make sure that there is an even spread across Hackney, so that if you're in the north of borough, you can access an autism ARP, walk to school if possible, rather than having to get a taxi and travel to South Hackney. So the future plan is very much that we've got a coherent spread of provision across the whole local area.
Thank you very much for that. Joe and Richard.
My question actually was related to that, which was whether you could give a little bit more detail both about the capacity and the timelines. But I guess in particular response to what you've outlined, my question would be around the provision of ARPs at secondary level. You've talked about Simon Marks and Nightingale. We have a number of ARPs across primary phase, but where are those children moving up into the next phase? Where are they going to go? And also, just what are the barriers? What are the challenges to that process? And in terms of a potential new special school or additional unit, are we confident about the needs that we need to meet, and are they all going to be met in one setting? Is there a coherent group of needs that you've identified for that special school? What are the processes or what else needs to be done to make that happen? And what is the timeline? I know you've got a scoping stage.
Yeah, so
Before you come back on that, sorry, can I just take a question from Richard? Sorry.
Yeah, it was related really to something Sarah said earlier. So I agree with you about the effectiveness of speech and language service. But then you talked about a waiting time for autistic reviews. I think you said 13 months. That is a huge amount of time for a young person. And what I see is a disproportionate number of young people on the autistic spectrum who get excluded, often because that has been unrecognised. But it may be that it's not been unrecognised, but simply it's been undiagnosed. I wonder if there are any plans to actually bust that waiting time down, because I do think it is important to one of our other strategies, which is about reducing exclusions.
Okay. First thing, Nick, commissioning, send, and looking at how we use the data to inform future commissioning intentions, and the challenge, do we have sufficiency of provision in the secondary sector? Because we as a local authority have a statutory duty to ensure we provide sufficiency of provision for children in mainstream schools, as well as specialist sector as well, to ensure that all children have access to provision. And some of them will be able to discharge us through, with reasonable adjustments, their provision. Children have their needs met in mainstream schools. Some of them will go to special schools, some of them will go out of the area to access the non-maintained sector. So there are a range of measures that are deployed to ensure we have sufficiency of provision. We know that data makes clear there are some real pressure points in the secondary sector. Absolutely. We're not saying we've got this licked. So we are looking at the future, we're looking at future demand, looking at future need. We're extending the capability and capacity of our special schools estate as well, building more ups in terms of, or commissioning more ups. But I haven't mentioned it today, but I'm in the process of developing a programme which will look at our Education 2030 strategy, which looks at how we as a local area, using the expertise in our schools and settings, the voluntary sector, our partners across education, health and care, and come together to look at Hackney Education 2030. What do we want the world to look like? What's going to be our need? What's going to be our demand? What's going to be our opportunity? So do we have sufficiency of provision, not just in the mainstream sector, but in the specialist sector as well? So there's a plan in place to do that forward look. It will kick off with a summer, we'll get work groups together, we'll look at lots of data and come up with some recommendations and so forth. That's in the future. I'm not really going to talk in detail about that yet, but Nick, commissioning.
Yeah, and so we keep the analysis running around on a yearly basis. The looking over the other side of the table that we could always do with secondary heads, secondary head schools being engaged in additional resource provision. At the moment, the continuing provision needs rebalancing. So we have to be really clear what we want mainstream schools to do, and we are working hard through our graduated approach and team around the school to make sure that schools are confident, that we have the second highest per capita number of education, health and care plans in our primary school. And we made, and those children on those plans are slowly starting, or not so slowly, starting to come through the secondary sector at the moment. So we have to right size that mainstream provision. We have to also balance that provision with additional resource units in our mainstream schools, and then we have to make sure that our categorisation of our special schools fits the needs of the children coming through. That's about a 3-year cycle. So at the moment, the initial analysis was based on the deficit of autism and speech, SAM, social emotional mental health, and that was the 2020 figures, 2021 figures, and we're now looking at the 22 figures to look at that. And so we may change it, and we may just do something differently. But at the moment, we definitely need our autism places to increase that, and also our capability in that area as well.
Joe, rest assured we're looking at data. I mean, Sarah mentioned earlier the JSNA, the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment. We're looking at as much robust data as possible. What does the data tell us about our need and our provision, and what is it we're going to commission and decommission and stop doing? But hey, there's no system as bulletproof, as it were, should I say. But we are looking to be as evidence-based and needs-led in our approaches as possible. Would you pick up Richard's query?
Yeah, of course. So we are in no way complacent at all at our autism waiting times. We know it's a huge issue, and we know it has such a knock-on effect for children themselves and their families. In terms of at service level, we have put additional recurrent funding into our autism diagnostic pathways, and there's just ongoing demands and capacity work that's happening across all of our pathways. I suppose outside of that, again, there's a lot of partnership work around how can we support these children and young people when they are on waiting lists. We're aware that there's a lot of work at the moment around emotional behaviour, emotionally based school avoidance. I knew I would get the acronym wrong, but we know that there are children who may be on autism waiting lists, maybe on mental health waiting lists, maybe, you know, other issues, waiting for other services, and have increasing levels of anxiety and aren't going to school. So there's a huge area of work across the partnership around that. I think a lot of the work through the graduated response around the team around the child, team around the school. So again, we have health colleagues who are part of those school-based meetings, and they're very much intended to have that kind of earlier conversation about needs children may be experiencing and what support could be put in place. And just going back to Cam's about, we now have an integrated single point of access, which in due course we hope will be very much part of an integrated kind of single front door in terms of our overall early help offer. So they're just a few examples of how, yes, we're trying to tackle the actual demand and capacity at service level, but then thinking about the wider support we can put in place as a system.
Can I just suggest that as we have knowledge of that waiting time, looking at how other services might be repurposed in the short term to meet that need. I'm not going to, well, yes, I'm going to name, for example, the re-engagement unit, purely as an example. Maybe that team or another team could do some short-term work around this, which might involve some training for their own team, their own staff as well. But I think if we have knowledge of a gap that is causing a significant detrimental impact for youngsters, we should look at if there is a short-term way of at least mitigating against that situation.
Thank you, mate. Because you've just talked about training, may I just also draw the link with the training programme that I know is in the plan as well, and the particular focus around autism training being rolled out to schools. And again, thinking about the kind of further stages of this, about how we can continue to deliver the same training to other partners across the system as well. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you. Stephen, not to leave out our colleagues in the children's social care part of us and continue around the waiting list space. Anything in particular you want to add into me?
I suppose just to say that from a disabled children's services perspective and short breaks, we're aware that there may be children who clearly do have autism but have not got the diagnosis yet, so we don't allow that to be a barrier. We will, where health colleagues or schools have kind of informed us that a child is highly likely to receive an autism diagnosis, if we feel it's necessary, then we will put a care package in place or something before we get that diagnosis to ensure that that kind of gap isn't prolonged for something that's not accountable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we bring this item to a close, I just had a couple of questions that I was really hoping to ask. Number one being around the Ofsted inspection that we're anticipating within the next 6 months, and I'd be keen to hear what partners have identified as being the top priorities with this in mind. And just following on from that, I also have a question around joint commissioning. The success of this action plan will, to a large degree, depend on the effectiveness of local partnership working among statutory partners and other stakeholders. What assurance can officers from education, health, and I have to say it's a shame that our partners from adults social care are not here today, because that's an integral part of this partnership. So just to note that. But what assurances can officers provide that the proposed governance structures adequately support and promote further partnership working? Just as a sort of add-on to that one, noted that in previous meeting that we're aware that there are no jointly commissioned SEND services. This was from a previous meeting. So we welcome this as a priority area for this strategy, but just whether we have the confidence that we are going to be able to deliver joint commissioning, and if we sort of know what we think the challenges are to that partnership working around joint commissioning, because it hasn't been happening up until this point, I suppose.
Okay. You're absolutely right. We are due a SEND inspection with a focus on how effectively has the local area implemented the SEND reforms in 2014. Nisha and my colleagues, it's not just Ofsted who will be inspecting the local area, it's the CQC, the Care Quality Commission as well. So it's important that we don't wish to upset our colleagues on the health and care partner system as well, because their regulator will be holding us to account, as well as Ofsted will be looking at the education element. With regards to, in terms of readiness, the SEND Partnership Board, which we've mentioned a few times today, are engaging with a programme of work, and Nick, there's been a significant body of activity in that space. We had an event last week, didn't we, in terms of summits, and gosh, there's so much activity going on, and we're fortunate that Councillor Woodley as well is a member of our SEND Partnership Board. But in terms of readiness, we have our self-assessment that we're developing. We're developing our Annex A, which is our evidence base, as well as part of the process. We're looking at where our strengths and weaknesses are and potential lines of inquiry. So there's a whole framework of activity ongoing about it. Joe, do you want to just give some edited highlights regarding that, please?
Yes, so we're going through a process of getting ready all the information we'd need to provide if we got a call on a Monday. So it's about 60 documents we're trying to prepare at the moment, which will be sent into Ofsted to the inspectors. The main change for this inspection is the way it looks at the lived experience of the child or the young person, which is new for the SEND inspection world. And part of the process will be what Ofsted are calling tracking meetings. So they'll be selecting 6 children at random, and they will speak to everyone involved with that child or young person's journey. So that's a massive shift in how they're looking at how we provide services to children and people. So that's something we're working through at the moment. Our SEF is coming along, our self-evaluation, very much linked to the developments in the SEND action plan as well. So we're starting to think about what the key lines of inquiries might be as part of the inspection. As you mentioned, we think joint commissioning will come up, joint commissioning of services. We're quite clear that Parent for Adulthood will be an area for focus as well from the inspectors, because we know we've got more work to do in that area. And then we're also thinking that the rate of say suspensions in secondary settings for children with EHC plans will be an issue as well, or a line of inquiry. And as you know, we're doing lots of work around that to try and prevent that from happening. But those are what we're thinking the areas of focus will be, looking at our current data and progress.
Sarah, comment on joint commissioning, please.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is a really interesting one because I think it depends on your definition of joint commissioning. And yes, in many ways, we are working to the point where we can say many of our services are fully joint commissioned because we have a single contract that's held by one part of the organisation on behalf of the whole system. And maybe that's in the kind of purist sense. But you know, we do work as a joint commissioning team. All of our approach is around working jointly together. We have services that may not be currently sit within a single contract, but we do jointly commission together. Stephen and I have been involved in something to do with occupational therapy in the last 12 months, where we've absolutely undertaken joint review and have moved forward with agreeing funding and completing arrangements on that basis. Ultimately, over the next year or so, our plan is to get to a single integrated commission service. So we are on that journey across actually quite a number of our services. So speech and language therapy is another one where we've done quite a lot of work around identifying the different elements of the service that are commissioned by a number of commissioners across the system from the same provider. And it's, again, you'll see that in the action plan. That's a big priority for us to truly integrate our commissioning arrangements, because often our our providers are delivering the service as if we are jointly commissioning. So I think it's a mixed picture. Things like the Parent Carer Forum, tendering for a host provider for a period of time. We are doing that in the truest sense of joint commissioning, and we're also looking to do the same in terms of strengthening some of our advocacy support. Our WAMS work, our wellbeing and mental health support in schools, has been done for many years through our CAMS Alliance, which is a true partnership of all of our statutory and voluntary providers. And as an alliance, they are making commissioning decisions and working together. So I think we've got a lot of examples actually of how we jointly commission, but I think things are kind of called different things and seen through a slightly different lens. All of the work we're doing around the estate strategy, by necessity, we will be joint commissioning that total offer that is made for children in those placements. And in terms of other health partners, our public health colleagues are recommissioning a number of their children's public health services, reframing them as 0 to 19s or to 25 with SEND. And colleagues across the partnership from education, health and social care are part of that joint commissioning process. So I think there's a lot going on. I think we're possibly not always very as good as we could be about describing that to others and demonstrating the impact of that joint commissioning work, but that's what we're seeking to do through the CEF, and we'll continue to do that through the action plan.
Thank you very much. Councillor Woodley.
I just wanted to comment on the inspection, that if I think back to when Jackie commissioned the peer review, at that point we hadn't brought forward the strategy, we hadn't begun to outline the action plan, but we were already very committed to improvement within the system and joining forces more closely. We kind of knew ourselves and we knew we had some work to do. But thanks to that process, we now know ourselves even better. And actually at the summit that Paul just referred to, it was a very big, busy room with staff from all across the different services. And it was really interesting to hear what they had to say, about the strengths and weaknesses. And again, it just adds to that sense of knowing ourselves. And it's one of the reasons that we thought it was really important and that you asked for this to come to this room as well, because if you can see anything that we're missing, this is the time to tell us. We don't want to be defensive about this. We want to improve the service. We know it's an adversarial system. We know our children are what matter, So I think this is a real opportunity for you to come in or to reflect after this meeting and give us your feedback, and we'll take that on board.
Thank you very much for that. And on that point, actually, I think we would like it to come back to us next year. I think it would be helpful for us to also see, once it's no longer draft and that it's been ratified, I'd be particularly keen to sort of see whether there are any sort of key performance indicators that we've identified. But yes, I do think, Councillor Woodley, that it would be helpful for us to look back at some of the meetings that we've had where we have taken issue in particular around data. And I'm thinking quite specifically around the breakdown of ethnicity in relation to children with certain different types of special educational needs, especially within the context, much like as Richard has alluded to, around school exclusions. I think the sense was it's very difficult to drive the development and improvement of services when we're not quite understanding the drivers for some of these challenges, especially seeing as we're seeing a huge growth in the diagnosis of social and emotional and mental health needs. And it would be really helpful for us to, instead of reacting to this, to sort of be a bit more proactive in understanding what the drivers are. So yes, I think we'll definitely go back and have a look at previous meetings and things that have come up for us. But ultimately, I think it will have a lot to do with what are the things that you're trying to measure, and which I think right at this point we're not yet at that stage where we're identifying what they are. So yes, that would be really helpful if we can do that. So thank you very much. Those of you who've come to contribute towards this item in particular, and apologies to those who have to stay for the others, watching everybody else leave. So now moving on to item 5, which is budget monitoring. for Hackney Education. So budget monitoring is an important part of the overview and scrutiny function. And the Children and Young People Scrutiny Commission reviews the budgets of key council directorates annually to ensure that spending is aligned to budgets and the agreed policy priorities of the council. The attached budget monitoring report details in-year budgets for Hackney Education together with management actions taken to address overspend and progress in achieving agreed budget savings for 2022-23. For this item, I think we've only got, is it Sajid? So welcome, thank you for joining us today, and we've also got Paul Senior. We don't have as long for this item, so if I can ask members of the Commission and Sajid to be succinct with your introduction of this paper and for follow-up questioning. Handing over to Sajid, I'm not sure who's...
Thank you. The paper provides an overview, as we've said, of the financial situation with regards to education as part of the wider local education system. It shows the pressure points, it shows the drivers as well. So I'd like to formally thank Sajid and his team for undertaking the necessary to put this together. We go through quite a robust process on a monthly basis where we produce these reports. Sajid reports into my senior leadership team. So my senior leadership team are aware of the pressure points and the direction of travel with regards to a number of these areas. You'll see that SEND sits pretty high in terms of the real pressures because it's a demand-led budget. You'll see the significant overspend in education is driven predominantly by SEND. There's some underspends in certain parts of the system as well, but SEND and associated SEND transport are the biggest pressures here as well. Sajid, would you be able to give some edits to highlight, please, from the report?
Yeah, sure. As Paul mentioned, the SEND pressures are the key. And then with some overspends in our children's centres and also within education operations. I should add the budget. This is the budget monitoring position at period 8, so the end of November. So the overall overspend is £5.9 million. However, £1 million is related to the 2022-23 pay award, which is going to be met corporately. So once that's taken out or adjusted for, the overall overspend is £4.8 million. Mainly high needs, as we've mentioned. There's underspending in the other areas which mitigate the position down to 4.8 million. Paragraph 3.4, page 54 of the pack, gives some detail about the SEND deficit, which at the end of 21-22 was 13.9 million. And with our current predictions, we're predicting that it will be circa 18.7 million at the end of this financial year. And it also gives some information about the DfE SEND Better Value Programme. Further summaries are and tables of variances are and narrative is on page 55 of the pack. Plus, there's more budget detail for children's centres and our spend on SEND independent and non-maintained special schools at Appendix 1, which is on page 57 of the pack.
Thank you very much. So questions from the Commission. Councillor Suso-Runga and Councillor Troughton, please.
I think Councillor Troughton put her hand up.
Councillor Troughton first then.
I just don't understand the figures for Hillside Children's Centre. It doesn't make sense to me that the year to date is 280 and that the year end would be 531. Does that mean they spend $250,000 in the last year? I'm sorry, I just don't understand that.
Can I just add a couple of questions around children's centres onto that before I bring you in, Councillor Suso-Runga? On that point about Hillside, officers have in the past suggested that under occupancy is a key driver in overspend within children's centres, and yet the budget table in Appendix 1 shows that those centres with highest occupancy have highest forecast overspend. Would you be able to explain that? And also, Anne Tyler, which I don't think we were aware has under occupancy challenges, has had an overspend of 148,000, which equates to 30% of the total overspend in the children's centre budget. So what factors are driving the overspend in these specific children's centres?
So in respect to Hillside, essentially sometimes the profiling of the actual budgets and when spend takes place can influence it. This is the position at the end of period 8, so we have got 4 more months to go. The prediction is as it is there, so the year-end forecast is 531,000. Within this, the variances within children's centres are for 3 main reasons. So lower fee income, but this year we've also seen increased energy costs as well. So that's a factor. Last year, when it was an issue, when increased energy costs weren't an issue, it was easier to disaggregate and sort of pinpoint overspends due to reduced fee income. This year, a real issue has been increased energy costs, and also there's higher agency staff costs for certain posts within children's centres as well. So there are overarching explanations for some of these variances.
And about that distinction and that is the case for Anne Tyler having an overspend of 148,000 and
largely I believe it's energy costs and agency staff use as well.
Right, okay. If anybody has a follow-up around children's centres, I'll bring you in now, otherwise I'll go over to Councillor Councillor Binny Lubbock.
Yeah, I was just wondering, because Fernbank didn't seem to be mentioned in there, so I was just wondering what the current status of those 2 children's centres, Tilside and Fernbank, are, which were earmarked for closure within consultation. Are they all being still providing services at both sites? Are staff being recruited to positions that become vacant, and are sites continuing to operate at the same capacity and accepting children?
Did you want to have you got a follow-up?
Yeah, from the children's centres. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's been ongoing cost pressures in children's centres, and this has, slightly increased from figures we were given last year. I mean, I just wonder whether there's been any, what's the sort of underlying issues here in relation to sort of usage? We were given evidence of following the pandemic, there was increased part-time usage. It's obviously a sort of complex system of free childcare. I mean, I wonder how much analysis you've been able to do of that and how that impacts the sort of funding of children's centres. And also, there's ongoing working patterns of parents emerging from the pandemic as well, where, that will increase the demand for part-time places. And is there, has there been any thought given to whether they've got the appropriate system of fees and charges, in relation to children's centres, to support them, to support them to remain open and to, have an intake which reflects the whole of our community?
Yeah, I'm mindful that it's obviously quite a finance report, and if we wanted to get into that area of obviously subject and the actual work of children's centres, actually more than happy to arrange for folks from the children's centres part of the system, the early years part of the system, to be here. But mindful, obviously, Sajid is our financial accountant, and obviously has put this report together. But if we're wanting to get into that area of bringing subject matter experts from the children's centres, the earliest part of the system, that might need to be a more targeted conversation. So it's just being realistic in managing expectations, Chair. That's all.
Okay.
I can speak to, I don't know if you want to come on, but I can speak to both of those. Well, I mean, just to reassure you, Alistair, that we haven't forgotten about Fernbank. It sits within that top row of the children's centres developed because it's school-based, it's run by Jubilee.
Okay.
So it is still in use. In your question about putting in permanent staff, I think it's fair to say, and you might want to correct me, or Paul might want to correct me, that with most staff across the children's centres, we are using interim, either short-term, fixed-term contracts or agency whilst we're in this period of sort of review, which I think I'll pick up in the question time, just because that's the practical thing to do. Sorry, your question was, I've forgotten now, Margaret.
Well, I mean, I don't know how much detail you can give. I mean, I do think
use.
Use. I mean, I think it is finance based. Really, it is. How. Yeah, I mean, how much information do we have in the change of usage and how that's affecting the income, really, in broad terms? So
the difference between us is mine is anecdotal. Yours would be more like what's actually coming in, but anecdotally. Absolutely, there's more flexible use. There, parents and carers are taking up the kind of the entitlement, the 3 hours, and then maybe staying home the rest of the time. So we're not seeing the same full-time use that we did prior to the pandemic. But in terms of adapting the fees and charges to kind of meet that, I think that's something that will come out the other side of the Children's Centre review. What we've done for April is pick up on the work that we did with the Task and Finish group in 2020, I think it was, in order to address, the income requirements that we need. But there is obviously a risk with that, as one of the reasons that we put a halt on that during the pandemic, that we will lose some of our higher fee paying parents, and it will affect that kind of socioeconomic mix that we have in the children's centres. So we're going ahead this time, but it's a risk, and it has to be part of our overall review that we're doing this year.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Councillor Susarunga, you had to really wait to get your question in, and then Richard afterwards, please.
No, thank you, Chair. No, it makes sense because it's a different sequence. I refer to point 5.1, page 56, cost reduction proposals. And my question is, what are the plans to develop and achieve cost savings? And my supplementary question is, what is the anticipated value of these savings? Thank you.
And can I just bring in Richard before you answer, please?
Well, my question to Judy is very much a finance question as a member of Schools Forum as well. I'm interested in pursuing this underspend. Where does the money from the underspend come from? Because if it comes from the DSG, it should go back into schools. But if it comes from other sources of income, then that's fine. It can reasonably be used to offset against the overspend. Where does the underspend come from? And is any money going back into schools?
Okay, cost reduction measures. We're working through a range of measures. When we look at SEND as being the biggest pressure, it's referenced in the paper, the work of the Developing Better Value programme, which is a Department for Education initiative. We're actually putting together a number of local areas that are what you'd almost call on the amber list. We're not quite in the red zone, which I mentioned some of those local areas in big numbers in terms of overspend, and they're what they call those safety valve areas where the DfE are setting some targets for 5-6 years with regards to some aggressive timescales and bringing their finance overspend down. But we're in the cohort of Developing Better Value where we're just working through it. In fact, Sajid and Nick just came from a 2-day event last week with the Department for Education where we're looking at that. So whilst we're working through the action plan with our colleagues at the Department for Education, eventually that will determine what measures we can be putting in this space. But it's very much in its infancy to be looking at that as yet. So I think what we've got is you've got some information in there at the moment about the ambition, the intention, but the biggest pressure is SEND, high needs, and therefore that's why the Develop Better Value programme, the plan that comes out of that, will inform what goes in that section. So it really is to be continued. With regards to the underspend, Sajid, are you okay to respond to Richard's query on that?
And Naeem has put he's in the meeting.
Everyone,
So I don't know
apologies,
who.
I can't join in person. I'm recovering from a hernia operation. I'm
Oh
just
dear.
trying to take it as easy as possible. Yeah, just to build on the point that Paul was making about the deficit recovery plans, and also the 2-day residential course that Sajid attended last week. There is a real opportunity for us to learn from what other local authorities are doing in this space as well. So I think it's a real opportunity for us to share and kind of learn from best practice in terms of developing cost reduction proposals. So I think that's something both Paul and I are actually collectively quite excited about, is kind of learning from what's worked well in other places and seeing how quickly we can mobilise effective deficit reduction programmes in our space as well.
Thank you, Naeem.
Could you pick up on Richard's query?
Yeah, in terms of the underspend, it's a deliberate underspend. So it's the actual top slice, the 0.5% from the schools block, right, the high needs block. So the way it's presented on here is a 1.1 million underspend on the schools block of funding, and effectively it mitigates the overall overspend in high needs.
Okay, thank you. Dan. And you got money back then.
Richard.
I'm sure you voted on it.
Richard, you are a rascal. Never miss an opportunity. But absolutely, it's a good challenge because it's the type that we want, and that's what we want in terms of there's an overspend in one part of the system, significant overspend, and dare I say, Hackney are not alone in that space with regards to high needs. But if there's an underspend, well, what's the narrative behind that? So I think it's a good challenge.
Chair, could I just say I'm looking forward to when Paul turns from amber to green.
Okay, Paul turning from turning into the Incredible Hulk or something like that.
Any other questions from the Commission? Councillor Turbot-Doloff, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is related to the deficit within SEND. The cumulative SEND deficit will be in excess of £18 million at the end of this financial year, 2022-2023, which continues to represent a serious financial risk for both for Hackney Education and wider council budget. Can you update us perhaps on to the Commission on the most recent meetings with the DfE, which was mentioned in the report, sort of seeking assurance of government commitments to cover the cumulative overspend, and what local contingencies are being developed if this sum is not underwritten by central government?
Okay.
Before you come in on that point, sorry, just another one very briefly, just about the report predicts that we've got a 5.4 million overspend in SEND. We've probably got hunches as to where what's fueling that, but it would be helpful if you could set out what, if you could outline the main areas of overspend within the SEND budget, please.
Okay. What's fueling it is demand and need. We have a statutory duty to provide provision in response to need. We have a statutory duty to provide education, health and care plans and targeted support and sensible if the need has been assessed as requiring so. So to do so would be a breach of statutory duty and a failure to comply with legislative requirements. So it's a demand and a need which is driving.
But are there specific things in terms of, we've heard historically, SEND transport, independent provision, is it the same things that we've been hearing about? You're nodding, so I'm guessing.
I think it's all of the above. I mentioned earlier about going from 4.5% last year statutory plans to 5.3% this year. I mentioned the demand in specialist provision, whether that be in special schools locally or having to develop more additional resource-based provisions, more children having to go into the independent non-maintained sector. And therefore, if more children are in the system as a percentage of, more children are going to require access to specialist SEND transport as well. So those are the biggest, it's the demand and it's the need. And it's not just the demand in terms of the numbers, it's the specification and the designation need and the complexity around specialism. And again, it's incredibly acute. So those are the biggest drivers. We have to discharge our statutory duties. When it comes to that we can't just turn the tap on. Local areas such as Kent, why is it they're running with a £250 million overspend in the SEND space? It's not because they wish to generate £250 million overspend, it's because it's a statutory duty, you have to do it. With regards to the deficit, getting to that 18.7 million, what's our measures? Naeem has mentioned and Sajid has mentioned the work of the Developing Better Value programme, which is why we are selected. We are in that amber cohort, and we are looking at the measures, what good practice is going on in other areas as well. We are looking at approaches to help drive those costs down. It is fundamentally going to come down to how effectively can we develop more local provision to reduce the need for children having to go out of borough in the independent sector. How can we build the work of early help, as an example, prevent the need for more children, young people requiring access to education, health and care plans? So how can we stop the demand at the foundational stages of concern and need? Because if we have less children, young people requiring statutory plans, therefore there'll be less children, young people requiring transport. There'll be less children, young people requiring access to SEND transport and specialist provision as well. So it's not just stopping it for the sake of it or reducing it, because there will always be that complexity and need. But if our local offer is broad, balanced, relevant enough, and it's got the right specialisms, we should be able to drive down some of those pressures as well. Ultimately, it's about making sure that our children and young people have access to the right support at the right time. That's the biggest driver here. And if it's SEND, it's SEND. But can we have needs met in mainstream school? If not, can it be in special schools? If not, where can it be best met? So the Developing Better Value programme offers that opportunity. And on the back of the training that Sajid has just mentioned and Naeem has mentioned, there'll be more activity ongoing. We'll be developing a Developing Better Value programme and share. This is something I would suggest that comes back to this forum, because this is going to be a big vehicle for how we as a local area, as our partners, come together to address some of those cost pressures, but at the same time bringing down those cost pressures while still discharging our statutory duties. Now, if the statutory duties are going up, but you're trying to bring the finance pressures down, that's a real challenge. But it's something that we'll be looking at, learning from other local areas. We'll be looking at the vehicle that is developing Better Value programme to underpin that programme of work. So Chair, is something in addition to key performance indicators for the work is saying as we set out to implement our strategy, I would strongly recommend it's something that this forum has a look at as well in the not too distant future.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Any other questions from the Commission? In which case, I've got a few before. I think we're probably going to. Did you want to come in, Councillor Gordon?
Yeah, just really briefly on.
Yeah, sure. I don't think you need to.
I mean that's obviously very helpful, and I mean I think we're all sort of very hopeful that this school estate strategy is going to have some impact in this space. But you know, as Councillor Turbot Dell have said, I mean, it's still a really significant, serious financial risk for Hackney Education. It's obviously one of the highest figures on the risk audit, and you know the 18 million is more than the reserves. So it's have you had any recent conversations with central government about the the future of this, the tolerance that has been in relation to this, and whether there is any whether you've got any sort of concerns that in the future this is something that Hackney will have to fund?
It's a significant risk, absolutely. Yeah. It's because it's a statutory duty, it's not something we can negotiate. We have to do it. We mentioned about the training that was with the Department for Education led, so these conversations are ongoing. And as I said, if you look at it as at a macro level, the funding gap in SEND nationally is 2.5 billion. The Hackney equivalent of that is the numbers you see before you. It's about, dare I say, I'm saying government policy has driven this agenda, but potentially it has, because education, health and care plans and the demand for specialist provision has gone up and gone up and gone up and gone up. Since 2014, the demand for specialist provision in England has increased 65%, but in Scotland it's only increased 5%. In Scotland they didn't have the same reforms. So that's just one example how government policy can impact as well. It's an important indicator. The intention is to ensure that our children and young people have their needs met as close to home as possible in the right provision relevant to their assessed needs. We do have conversations with the Department for Education. We have conversations with Ofsted as a regulator as well. And I mentioned earlier, we're looking at, through the work of our ambitions for the 2030 strategy, which I'll be communicating in the not too distant future, how we look at our local continuum of provision, specialist provision, alternative provision in response to local needs, because we have to make sure our local offer is broad and relevant in response to local needs. So we are having those conversations, Councillor.
Thank you.
So I think Naeem wanted to come in on that point.
Yeah, no, just going to echo what Paul said. Yeah, so he mentioned conversations with the DFE. I'm on national groups with the DFE, and this is one of the issues, obviously, that local authorities continue to raise. I suppose year on year we see an increase of about £5 million crudely in terms of our expenditure, and what we continue to try to lobby them is, even if they're not going to come up with a sustainable funding solution that addresses all of what will be somewhere in the region of about 20 million on the balance sheet by the end of this financial year, that they fund us in excess of our pressure year on year, so that we can start to make some inroads on that cumulative pressure. But we are looking at options to create reserves, probably not to cover the full extent of it, but even as part of the conversations with the DFE and the Delivering Better Value programme, about if we were going to fund some element of it and get an additional funding, which is what they've done in some other local authorities as part of the safety valve programme, whether it's going to be something to that kind of magnitude or not, we're unclear at this stage. But through every mechanism that we can, we continue to lobby DFE for additional funding. We're very clear, it's not just a Hackney issue, it's a national issue, as Paul's alluded to. So anything that we can continue to do in this space to lobby them, obviously, is greatly appreciated.
The lobbying really does work because in recent years the department have found funding mid-year to actually allocate to local authorities in the SEND space on a regular basis, because I think local authorities have made it very clear that the funding doesn't go far enough. It doesn't go far enough, and they produce data. So in recent years, we get our allocation, and then guess what? In a couple of months, in additional funding is made available. So lobbying in this space really does work, and central government do realise the significant gap. Hence why they've brought out this Send an Alternative Provision Green Paper, which is looking at the census and recognising that something has to change. The system isn't sustainable.
Couldn't come sooner, soon enough. Sort of getting, you know, in all my years of chairing this commission, this is just, it's just desperate, isn't it? We've got all these ambitions, and yet the need is outstripping our capacity to be able to meet the need, let alone think about how, you know, you can realistically sort of improve services. The firefighting is a real challenge.
Firefighting, crisis management. When we look at advances in medical science, for example, more and more children now are living at the foundational stages of concern and need that maybe in previous years they wouldn't have left, because we've seen, and that's a really good thing. But there's also support that's required for those children, young people that maybe wouldn't have been there before. So advances in medical science, advances in social care, advances in education. Our mainstream schools are incredibly inclusive. Our mainstream schools are working with children who a few years ago would have only been able to have their needs met in special schools. The special schools are working with children who a few years ago would have only had their needs met in residential sector. It has a knock-on effect right across the system. Our mainstream schools in Hackney are incredibly inclusive. I mean, the schools you've got here on the stand, these schools go over and above, and I think in many other local areas, the children, but many other that are in Andy's schools, that are in Richard's schools, probably would have had to have been in special schools or alternative resource-based provision or so forth. So there's real system pressure, is what I'm trying to point out.
Thank you very much. I've got just a couple of final questions, I think, if we can try and be brief, because we do have your Q&A to come also, Councillor Woodley. So question about independent and non-maintained commissioning. I think we probably know what are the factors driving it, but just if you can explain what are the drivers, but also whether the pseudo-dynamic purchasing system, I know, I'm impressed. I've remembered that term ever since, but yeah, whether we're seeing any improvements with this new commissioning system, whether that's helped us at all. Can I just add a couple of others to that? Sorry, I can see that you're writing, Paul, so feeling assured that you'll remember. Just wondering about vacancy rate saving of £800,000 set for Hackney Education. Can you give us an up-to-date figure on that? And how much has been achieved so far?
Okay, so Chief, can you talk about the vacancy, the number that we achieved? This was November, wasn't it? So when we update this, and I might be putting you on the spot there, because obviously this was November, whether we've got access to the most recent report. But before we get on to that, improvements in commissioning. There have been improvements in commissioning, and actually helps us to negotiate with our providers. We've got some very, very expensive providers in the independent non-maintained sector, and their prices are going up as well. So we'll have to have some mature conversations about capping rates and management of rates as well. And we on a regular basis ensure that our children and young people, when they need access to independent non-maintained sector provision, do so within statutory timescales, so we're not at risk. You hear horror stories about some children being on waiting lists for over a year in some local areas up and down the country. So our purchasing powers and our purchasing approach and our purchasing system allows us to be as responsive to need as possible, but it's not perfect. It's absolutely not perfect. So there's some real pressures in that space as well. But fundamentally, I'm a big fan of developing more local provision to strengthen the local offer, to reduce the need for children and young people having to go outside of the local areas to access their needs. Many of these children need residential provision, which is something we can't offer locally. We don't have specialist provision with a residential element. So if we were to be starting with a blank page, that's a big gap for us. That's a gap in our process, that we don't have residential provision. We've aligned with Specialist Seven. So again, but we're not in the position at the moment to build provision because government policy doesn't allow local authorities to build schools now. So we have to, we are beholden to our non-maintained sector in that regard. So gee, the changes on the underspend there from month 8 where we are now at times.
Or the vacancy factor.
Yeah.
So vacancy factor at period 8 and I think still at period 10, we were predicting that we're going to meet it. Essentially, the way it's dealt with in education is 2%. There's a 3.5% target for all directorates in the council. 2% is actually budgeted centrally, so that's always met. The other 1.5% is disseminated across budget holders, across all budgets. The first call on is obviously to try and meet it within your staffing budget. But where that's not possible, we ask budget holders to try and meet it from their non-staffing budget. And that period 9 and period 10 as well, budget holders were saying that essentially they're able to meet it from a combination of the both.
Okay. Councillor Charlton, and then I think we're going to bring this to a close.
Has income from trading services held up? Have schools sort of reduced their purchasing from traded services? Is that had a financial impact?
No, it's not going up. So we've got a circa £4 million trading income budget, and there was a variance of around 80k. So under budget 180k, but it is still in the scheme of things when you consider the target holding up.
Thank you very much for that. Really helpful. So we'll be moving on to item 6, please, the Cabinet Q&A with Councillor Woodley. So each year, the Cabinet members with responsibility for children's services are invited to attend the Commission to respond to questions and services within their respective portfolio. This evening, the Commission welcomes Councillor Caroline Woodley, the Cabinet Member for Families, Parks and Leisure, who will respond to questions on 3 policy areas in her portfolio which relate to children and families. The focus of these 3 policy areas is provided in detail at page 59 of the report pack, but can be summarised as thus. Firstly, the Commission is requesting an update on the future plans for children's centres in Hackney, in particular how future plans relate to the development of new family hubs. Secondly, the Commission would like a greater understanding of the support available for parents of children with special educational needs and has set out a number of areas where it would like clarification. And thirdly, the Commission is aware of pressures within specialist support services such as speech and language therapy and educational psychology for children with special educational needs, and is seeking assurance that there is a strategic plan to deal with this. So over to you, Councillor Woodley.
Okay, so I'll take each one and take questions, and I'll try and be short and snappy.
One at a time, please, and then we'll have questions. Any follow-up questions, please? Thank you.
Okay, so the first question is around future plans for children's centres. And I think you'll all be aware, but I'll recap in case, that there are sort of 3 parallel work streams underway at the moment, which will all sort of feed into one another. One of them was a sort of mayoral manifesto commitment to have a commission into affordable childcare. I feel like I work in many services where you kind of feel like the system is broken, SEND being one, childcare being another, and no matter how many times you tell the government, sorry for being critical here, that the free entitlement funding and so on for childcare is inadequate, does not meet the unit costs that you know providers have to find. Nonetheless, we just get minor increases on these on that offer rather than a reset of the system. But like with SEND, central government does know there is a challenge, does know there's a problem. We nonetheless feel that we need to kind of look at it from a Hackney perspective. So we'll hold the commission into affordable childcare. We've appointed an independent chair following an expression of interest process, and we'll be able to announce quite shortly who that is and their background. And we're still working through the sort of the parents, the providers, the voluntary community sector, officer membership who want to be involved in the inaugural meeting and subsequent launch of the commission, and that will launch in March, so it is imminent. We think it will run for between 6 to 9 months, probably 9 months if we really want to give it its due time. And And it will, as I say, take place in parallel to the other items of work that we're doing, one of which is the key one, the development of children and family hubs. Now, the elected members here have had the opportunity to come to an all-member drop-in, of which we've held 2 already. The first was setting out what the children and family hubs sort of vision and ambition is. The second was an update on the engagement that we've done. And the third one is coming up shortly, essentially to update you with where we are now in terms of drawing down funding. So for those that don't know, this is the government is funding the development of family hubs nationally. We're one of 75 councils that are benefiting from funding. It's around 4 million over the course of 3 years. And it has a very specific focus, which is around its Start for Life programme. So this is the first 1,000 days of a child, and around strengthening families. So parenting support, home learning, infant feeding support, perinatal mental health, which is a really has come up sort of politically as quite a major concern in Hackney, particularly around perinatal mental health in our Black and global majority families, and the development of parent carer panels and fora. What it doesn't do is fund childcare. So that is why it's really good that we have the parallel piece of work on the Affordable Childcare Commission. It also doesn't fund 0 to 19 and additional services there, which is one of the core ambitions of the family hubs, is to really align them with youth hubs and to ensure that children and families have somewhere to go really for support. And that's something which I really hugely welcome, because we just talked for a long time about SEND. We know there are cliff edge moments for SEND families, whether it's going from primary to secondary, whether it's through moving home, whether it's any sort of level of disruption really. And the idea that our children and family hubs, as we call them in Hackney, and our youth hubs can come together, align. And to some extent, this already happens, but it's really ad hoc. We have children at our children's centres, either through stay and play or through childcare, with siblings who, when we recognise that family support is required, we will, talk to that whole family. We will address the needs of siblings. But at present, it's not clear for the older children that that's a place that they can come, and that's something we can reset. However, the funding isn't following it. So, the vision is there, the ambition is there. We are doing loads of engagement work. So we've been engaging with parents and carers, of course, with our own children's centre staff, and more recently with the voluntary and community sector, to try and look at ways that we can kind of almost turn this tanker around and make a more supportive system. So if I go down to the timeline, okay, so 50% of our year 1 revenue funding, and that's 461,000 plus 18,000 capital. So it's a very small amount towards the fabric of our centres. Was received in January, and that was to achieve those funded elements that I described: service transformation, infant feeding, perinatal mental health, and so on. And we have to start sort of delivering against that. So as we've gone through this engagement process, we're drawing down the funding, we're trying to meet those targets, so to put those services in place. In terms of what we'll bring to Cabinet for approval, we will be looking at the transformation of 6 of our multi-agency children's centres. So we have 21 children's centres across Hackney. They're already in a sort of hub and spoke model because we have 6 strategic centres, so we call them clusters at the moment. That's going to move into us. I don't know how important the technicality is, but basically they'll move into our neighbourhoods model. So we'll have 4 family hubs, and each of those 4 family hubs will oversee a paired set of neighbourhoods. If you think of our primary care network neighbourhoods, I'm assuming everyone's familiar with them because we did a lot of work with them through the pandemic. For the family, for the parent, for the carer, for the child, it shouldn't really matter whether it's a cluster or it's a neighbourhood. Ultimately, they just want to know, where is their local hub, where can they go? So we'll have 4 family hubs, which will most likely be 4 of those 6 strategic centres you were talking about. And Taylor earlier, there's Linden. We've got some really excellent centres that offer universal services, and we are in an engagement process setting out options about which ones we want to transform into our family hubs. So we'll bring forward our decision and the consultation to you as that kind of emerges, and take that to Cabinet. We will also transform, as we set out in our early years strategy, a children's centre into, well, possibly 2 children's centres into additional resource provision for children with complex needs. So one in the north and one in the south, and that was something we began to consult on last year when we halted the consultation. And we will also be looking at the succession of provision of at least 1 centre, as we consulted on previously as well. And that's purely because we are still hitting something like, I think it's 500,000, isn't it, that we are overspent in children's centres. So there is no money for childcare coming out of the family hubs funding. We've still got pressure in the system. We will pick up probably pretty much where we left off in terms of looking for a centre, or 2 centres for complex needs, and for, oh, I've just been locked out of my notes. That's not helpful. And for kind of reducing the network. Now, we didn't really want to salami slice, so we are also talking to schools about their concerns, which comes into the other area, which is our sort of wider children's centre review. As you can see, there's an overlap between the family hubs and the children's centre review. And what the schools are suggesting is that we work with them to create a sort of a business case. They are dealing with the fact of pooling roles. They are running children's centres. They're concerned about any deficit coming out of the children's centre impacting on their schools. In some cases, the schools simply want to withdraw from the system altogether and not run a children's centre, which of course was one of the issues that came up last year. In other cases, they would be open to looking at whether there is an opportunity to outsource. So our children's centre will take the emerging findings from the Affordable Childcare Commission. It will take the reports from the Children and Family Hub engagement events and surveys, and it will also look at that as sort of a wider exploration of options in terms of outsourcing, and that could be looking across, the voluntary sector, cooperative sector, private, and so on. As with SEND, where we're sort of looking to take a sort of invest to save approach with provision, we'll have to take an invest to save approach also with our children's centre review. So we will need to commission someone to help us create that business case, and that's something we're just looking at the moment. So I think probably in terms of the elected members here, we could make that an item for the agenda for the next member drop-in, so you can understand the implications of that and talk about it properly with members and bring due challenge to that process before we move ahead, hopefully to secure the finance to do that review properly. In terms of when do we want things to be kind of in place, I think we want to have everything that's coming out of the Children and Family Hubs to Cabinet by the autumn. That might mean certain items go forward for consultation late spring, so sort of May, June. And again, I can bring that sort of next steps timeline to the next member drop-in, but that's the ambition as things stand. Shall I stop there?
Thank you very much, Councillor Woodley. Got a question from Sudanese. I'm not sure if we have any other questions from the Commission. Councillor Tebbit-Deloff, please. Sudanese, over to you.
I want to ask a question on the support provided for parents of SEND children. So, I mean, as you know, I always advocate for those who...
I'm just going to stop you there, Sudanese, because I think we're going to come on to that in the next question, if that's okay, unless it's okay, relevant to anything in relation to the family hubs. But I think we're going to move on to that for Councillor Woodley's next question.
Okay, I'll ask you when that comes.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Councillor Tebbit-Deloff and then Councillor Troutman, please.
Thank you. Very briefly, thank you, Councillor Woodley. Family hubs, would there be on-site provision of referral systems for families and their children with mental health and emotional support? And just added to that, especially thinking of families and the children with no recourse to public funds, are is this whole thing accessible for children and family with yes, with no access to funds.
I mean, I would say that pretty much all the family strengthening work that we do is around, you know, it's around social and emotional mental health. Sometimes it's around domestic violence, you know, sometimes it's around SEND and just, you know, that additional bit of advice or parent strengthening work. Sometimes it's around breastfeeding, you know, so it's a real range, and there are sort of experts within those strategic centres who you can refer on to. We work closely with the team that deliver WANs in schools as well, and obviously a lot of our referrals to children's centres come to school and vice versa. So there is that relationship there, and it's definitely a part of the focus.
Councillor, oh sorry.
How about all these provisions being accessible for families and children with no recourse to public?
I don't know about that actually. I mean, that's a constant challenge for us. We through the poverty reduction team, we do ensure that we have some funds for things like holiday activities and so on that are accessible for families with no recourse to public funds. But how that, I don't know if you know, Paul, how that would fit within the family hubs, the DFE funding, how we report to it. I think that could probably be quite challenging, to be honest.
It would be incredibly challenging,
Yeah.
but ultimately the ambition is to make sure that we provide that hub program to provide that wraparound, that targeted support. And you're right, it's probably a contradiction with the ambitions of the Department for Education program for that cohort.
We do have a high number of people as well in the borough that are again documented or have no recourse to public funds, and there is real concerns of residents that feel that maybe, you know, might not either through the language or the fear as well coming forward with the need for support for the children. So that's sort of what I wanted to take.
As the program evolves, if we have the evidence, the data to say there's a demand, there's a need, and there's a need for a bespoke solution, I think we've got some very flexible, innovative, creative folk who I'm sure will be able to look at finding a solution. But naturally, because the program is predominantly DFE funded, we will obviously have to work within the parameters which are set upon us. But absolutely, we'll endeavour to find a Hackney solution to a Hackney challenge.
It would depend to some extent how much support they need and what you'd be looking to refer them on to. Obviously, if they were accessing stay and play and we were able to pick up some needs that we were able to support there and then in the centre, then there's not a problem. But it's sort of how long is a piece of string, I suppose. But I will take it away and try and get you a more robust response.
Because I'm also the first Latin American elected member in the borough, and I do have quite a high number of people now. But Latin American families have feel sort of confident to come forward and also speak in the same language. I'm sure that this happens as well in the global majorities. But thank you that maybe we can sort of bring that back.
Yeah, it would be helpful to understand that a bit better. Councillor Troughton and then Councillor Binny Lubbock, and then I think we're going to move on to the next question, please.
Thank you, Councillor Woodley, for that very detailed explanation of, you know, where you've reached at the moment. I just want to clarify. Did you say that a number of the children's centres in maintained schools were considering options for, you know, not having this?
So withdrawing.
Yeah. So, I mean, do you think there are risks around this, and how would those risks, if you do? I mean, for me, I can see risks, you know, like of, you know, those actually not taking off or not embedding, or perhaps going in a you know, not working within the system that's been created in some way. How do you manage those risks and containments, make sure that, you know, that whatever happened was consistent with the model that, you know, we're trying to develop?
Sorry, before you answer, can I just bring in Councillor Binny Lubbock? Sorry.
Yeah, just picking up on what I was asking for around Hillside and Fernbank. Are the sites continuing to operate at the same capacity and accepting children, offering the same services, things like that? And will the current children's centres that are designated to become family hubs, will they offer the same range of services for early years once they transition? And I guess it feeds into what Councillor Troughton was saying, is if there are some schools who are not doing children's service centres in the future, then will we need to re-look at that model of what's closing and what's becoming a hub?
Yeah, so I think in terms of mitigating risk and in terms of what, how we will inevitably adapt our services, they both come out of the core dilemma, which is falling roles, pressure on our schools, pressure on their funding, looking at the external service that they offered and whether they can sustain it. And then over into the Hackney maintained settings, looking at what we're offering and whether we can sustain it. And all we've had, in recent years, really to add to what was already a strained system in 2018-19 is Brexit, COVID, a cyber attack, and an energy crisis. So, to suggest that our centres are in a place of resilience right now would be a lie on my part. What we wanted to do was not see that salami slicing, let's just save a bit here, save a bit there, that we were doing in order to try and, hold on to the network. And we were really proud. We've got the biggest, not that the number really matters, but we have a really impressive offer in terms of children's centres, one of the largest offers across London. And we do see great value in it, Sorry, political. I still believe in Sure Start. There is a really amazing service that we offer, and as I say, it's slightly at odds with the family hubs model that is being brought forward. In terms of mitigation, that was the whole point of the early years strategy, was to try and look at, well, what do we really want to do? What do we want to hold on to? What are we prepared to change? Where are our families with the most need? Should we be looking more at social care? Should we be looking more at family strengthening? Should we be looking more at emotional health than childcare? Well, how do you balance that out? Because, that's an income stream. You have a diverse income model. You need to make it all fit together. So I think this vision that I try to sort of put across of like turning a tanker around that we're doing at the moment with a review of children and family hubs is necessarily slow. And the fact that we have these three parallel pieces of work does make it potentially complicated. But I think the idea is that we will come out of it with a more robust system. So at the moment where we did have Millfields, withdrew from the service, and that felt very sort of, overnight. That wasn't necessarily strategically an area of the borough that we wanted to lose those universal services. So when Jubilee was coming, forward with a similar problem, we took a look at the overall sort of data, if you like, and to answer your question, yes, all the services are still ongoing in terms of the nursery provision, in terms of stay and play, and to drop-ins, that extra kind of offer that we have. Are the same problems arising that arose previously, particularly with school-based settings, in that they start off with quite poor numbers and they usually make it up by the end of the year? Yes, we're still seeing that pattern. Is there an added challenge because of flexible working, families taking their free entitlement hours and not necessarily paying for the additional hours, which is where you start to kind of pull the finances together? Yes, that is the problem. So the mitigation will be, as I say, we'll transform at least one, possibly two of our centres to get that early help to align with the work we're doing in SEND. We will close a centre. We'll do a better job, I think, of providing all the data to kind of demonstrate why, if it's that centre again or if it's a different one, why that's the one we're sort of looking at. And we will talk to the schools who are asking us to kind of help them make a business case about what that might look like, see if we need to bring in an expert to help us, set something out that makes them ultimately more independent, I suppose, of Hackney maintained, Hackney subsidy, in order to be more resilient down the line. So, really, really complex, tricky areas of work, and, your challenge will be welcome and important. And I did sort of, I was very conscious that I was sort of sitting in a sandwich here between sort of Joe, who keeps telling me about the increased demand, and Sajid, who keeps telling me how we're spending too much. And, it's not, it's quite an invidious position to be in. Ultimately, we're trying to sustain what we can because we know it's important to our children and our families and our parents and carers. So, the more you can engage, the better. I'm really, really, this has been one of the best, for me, one of the most interesting scrutiny commissions. This is on my brief tonight. So it's been really good to sort of have like that whole panel of expertise here as well in terms of the first item, and I just really, really welcome the scrutiny.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Woodley. If we can move on to the next question, support for parents with children with special educational needs, please.
Yeah, so the first question was around the role of the Parent Carer Forum and plans to restart this. Is that right? Yes. So you'll know, some of you, Joe, a particular that we decided to sort of reopen the whole Parent Carer Forum setup to try and get to a place where we are able to better support the Parent Carer Forum. We're really conscious that like HIP has done tremendous work. There are a team of volunteers. We've made quite high demands, I think, in terms of co-producing documents and strategies and attending meetings. And I think there has been some sort of sense of needing more support in terms of governance, needing more funding, needing, you know, something to kind of change and reset. So initially we brought in Contact, who is the DFE sort of advisory group for Parent Carer Forums. And they worked with HIP for a while, and then ultimately their proposal, or the proposal that we came up with, was that we have a reset, try and get a host organisation in place. There were a series of engagement sessions to talk about how that might come about. And I think that's going to be announced really imminently, who the host organisation is. And then the ambition is to work with HIP, to work with AS1, to work with other parent carer groups that I know work with Ella Ritchie around the local offer, with all our schools, to try and bring them all together under the umbrella of this host organisation, and to ensure that we're looking after our parent carer forums a little bit better than we have done, that communication changes. I think that was one of the challenges we got back at the summit, was that we could be communicating more, and in a way it's quite good hearing that, because that's something we can actually do quite quickly. We can change quite quickly. And then one of the main areas of work outside of the Parent Carer Forum, or to work with the Parent Carer Forum, is SENDIAC. So that's our Special Educational Needs and Disabilities Information Advice and Guidance Service. And I think when we had our staff restructure in SEND, we had a real lack of capacity in terms of our SENDIACs. We just didn't have enough SENDIACs. We didn't have enough caseworkers in our HCP casework team, and we didn't have access to enough educational psychologists. So part of the restructure was to address all that. And I can tell you by my inbox whether we've got enough SENDIACs in place or not. So every time my inbox starts to go crazy with casework, I know we've got 2 people off sick, or they've left, or, you know, it's a small team, but they can make a big difference. The main area where I get to interact and engage with them is when they join in mediation, where relationships are broken down between families and schools. They can give legal advice. I've got a list somewhere here, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it. They can give advice on local policy and practice, budgets and working together, education, health and care plans, mediation and dispute resolution, tribunal service and procedures, what to do when things go wrong, and where to get more support. So you can imagine like the relationship really between SENDIACs and our Parent Carer Forum and our pupil forums, our children and young people. You know, you have to have all those things working well together. And I think that's been an area which I've, since coming to the brief in 2020, been most conscious needs really needed to improve and more support. Shall I go on to the third one, or do you want to take questions on that?
I might, if possible, actually, that would be helpful, and then we can take questions on the 2, if that's okay.
So I think you were asking about waiting times, speech and language, and education and psychology. I can't now see if my notes are still true to the original.
Yeah, so access to specialist support services primarily.
Sarah covered the deal, so I'll just give you very quick bullet points. So I met with Hannah Hickman to talk about speech and language. And she said I'll just take a sort of summary area. So she said the majority of children who wait longer than 6 weeks for SALT, so speech and language therapy assessment, are under 5. And this is because of the way that school age service is structured and embedded in schools. In order to mitigate these wait times in our early years service, we have allocated staff flexibly across the areas to try and take account of gaps in staffing as well as increased demand in certain areas. Run assessment clinics on the weekend, use therapy time from school therapists during school holidays to provide both additional assessment appointments and intervention time. And I do want to chip in, because it's political, we have retained an enviable number of therapists in Hackney compared to other boroughs. I don't know if all does survive the better value process, but it's something that that we've championed both politically and sort of administratively.
We've done so much.
retain that.
Most local areas nationally are seeing a shortage of EPs. There's a lack of EPs going around. Whereas Hackney, actually, in terms of, there's less of a reliance on locums in this policy.
Yeah, well, with EPs there was that shortage. I know Joe was involved in some of the interviews we did, and actually it was a real challenge to recruit new EPs with experience. So we have kind of had to recruit some inexperienced ones and try and train them up the Hackney way. But you still just got to get those people in place. And very grateful again for members of the commission who get involved in that work. We over-recruited newly qualified staff in September to try to minimise the impact of gaps which arise during the year. It's that there's a high churn rate. And in the north of the borough, we've increased therapist time with a new staff member. There's something about how you hold families whilst they're waiting for therapy to start as well. And there are some examples of that going well that I think we need to build on. So there's parent workshops called Let's Talk Play for parents of children with language difficulties. And there's been a series of online sessions. I think there's 4 sessions have run since the start of this year with 12 families attending, 3 more scheduled between now and Easter. And there have sort of been reflections coming back from that about how it's benefited the children, so that's quite good. And quickly on the EPs, the team was increased in September 22, as we discussed. They've been running a parental advice service, which allows any Hackney parent to seek and receive advice and support regarding the needs of their children. And a weekly session is made available during term time for parents to access. And in spite of this, of course, we still do hear that children are unable to get the involvement of the educational psychologist. We have a backlog of work that we're trying to reduce, and we reckon we'll be getting things back up to a timely manner by May. So again, an area, yes, where we're aware that there's a challenge, that we're aware we need to do better, but we are working on it.
Thank you very much.
I've covered everything, haven't I? Now we can go.
So I know Sudanese had a question, and then Councillor Sizer, please.
So thank you, Councillor Woodley, and apologies for the previous thing. So my question was on support for parents of SEND children. As you know, I always advocate for those whose first language is not English, and come from the Turkish community. I know so many parents of SEND children, 2 of whom are actually extended family, and many of them don't know the support that the council could provide to them for a long period of time. So I wanted to ask, will the cabinet ensure that the services provided for parents of SEND children are accessible, and how will they make sure that these services are heard across Hackney by all residents? I also had another question, it's really quick. How will the cabinet work to lower the waiting lists for children waiting for educational psychology referral and assessment? Just because personally, and also from all the young people that I've heard, the waiting list and how long it is not prevents but stops young people from going to their teachers or going to people that they trust and saying I think referring themselves for these assessments. So yeah, I just want to ask how will the cabinet work to lower the waiting lists?
Thank you, Sudanese. Can I have the question from Councillor Sizer, please?
You'll be relieved to hear it's not a question. I really just wanted to state on the record how incredible Sendy eggs have been. and what an incredible service they are. You can tell that they're overstretched and that they're working at absolute full capacity, but I just wanted to state on the records that they really are a lifeline to many, many families, and just to pass on thanks. So it's not a question, you'll be pleased to hear.
Thanks, Anya. I'm also pleased to get questions from Susan as though. Yeah, the question around support for parents. There was a parent liaison post created with Councillor Bramble, held by Deborah Robinson, who's now in charge of the Inclusion Charter work that we're doing across schools. And essentially, the ambition is to have a more consistent approach. So a lot of my families that come to me with casework, they might have children with siblings, and one child has an absolutely amazing relationship with the school, communication is what they would hope, it works, and then their sibling is in another school where that communication isn't there. And that's nothing to do with language, that's to do with different systems of communication from school to school. So one of the things that myself, not only as a lead member, but also through the Hackney Schools Group Board, has been trying to do is talk to Deborah about ensuring that there is consistency across all the parent groups, you know, attached to schools, as well as those school pupil forums. So just to make sure that, for a start, we understand where those parents are and the carers and also the children, where they are, what the challenges are, where they need support. You're absolutely right in terms of language. I think we do try with any information we put out to parents through the parent carer forums that we were just talking about as well, the children and family hubs, and through school parent groups. We do try and sort of put a page on the documents that sort of says in a whole range of different languages where to come to if you would like to have that information in your own language. But I appreciate that is not the same as having somebody in the room who can speak that language. So one area that I think is really important, that I think we've just put out some comms around it last week, is around having parent champions. Because what I have found, and again, it's a lot to ask the parents always to be stepping in, I found that whenever I've had a case come to me where a family is feeling absolutely desperate, if they have a language issue, obviously that makes it even harder, is that there's always another parent within the children's centre or within the nursery or within the school who steps up and who kind of will quite often be the person that actually writes to me and asks for support, actually. So I think if we have within our SENDIAGs, if we have that capacity, if we can hire in translators where required, and then also that comes down to sign language and BSL, all that side of interpretation as well. And if we can have parent champions to kind of help us fill the gaps, at least identify where there are gaps, then you start to have quite a borough-wide sort of set of safety nets, don't you? But again, it's a big piece of work. So I think we start with that host organisation. We get all our parent care forums organised under that umbrella. We bring in our parent champions. We talk to our pupil forums. I come and have a catch up with you about the upcoming events, and just try and improve it, step by step. In terms of lowering waiting times, I did try and touch on that in terms of the additional capacity that we put into educational psychology. So since last September, and again in an intensive way just now, just so that we can meet our backlog by May. And I think you were saying there's another area now where we're seeing more of a challenge.
We are, but I mean, in terms of compliance with the 20-week timescale for issuing education, health and care plans, which access to education psychologists are part of that. This time last year, we were looking at 20%, we're now at 61%. So we actually, because of the increased capacity of EPs, we're seeing those waiting times come down. We're seeing better performance, better 20 weeks, when we're not at 100% or 90% where we want to be. As I said, the national average is in the 50s. We're better than that. It's the wrong benchmark because we're aiming to be the best we can be. But waiting times are coming down as parents are getting more, as we're issuing more education, health and care plans within 20 weeks. The EP advice, the health advice, the care advice is part of that. Again, we're seeing better response to ensure we're fully compliant.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to take the last two questions, please. Councillor Suso Runga and Councillor Binny Lubbock, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask about the new refreshed parent and carer forum. When will it start, and how will it function in terms of co-production? And secondly, in terms of advocacy, how can we improve the take-up, and do we provide for cultural and identity in advocacy support? Thank you, Councillor.
Councillor Binny Lubbock, please.
Yeah, my question is in a similar area. With the reset and the new host organisation, what has HIP's response been to that? Are they engaging with that and sort of being consulted around how that's going to look? And what resources are going to be provided for that new host organisation?
Page 37 of the report actually provides milestones and timescales with regards to the onboarding and progress with the parent care forum.
Give my question to Councillor Woodley. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, no, Paul did look at me and sort of say, can I come in on that one, because it was in the action plan, and I did give him the nod. But I should have said. Yeah, so you're right. Within the action plan, there are timescales set out, but I don't have them handily in front of me like Paul has. So do you want to just would you mind if Paul just sort of sets out those dates?
Yeah, page 37, it sets out progress, it sets out milestones, timescales, and key deliverables with a focus on the work. We need a parent carer forum who can bring that advice, that challenge, that support, that lens of the parents. It's important. So we are pretty close, but as I said, the information is in the report. It's quite helpful there. With regards to HIP, HIP have actually remained members of the SEND Partnership Board up until they're not too distant, and not up until not too recently. So they're an important part of the conversation as well. And even though they may not be our official designated parent carer forum in the future, we engage with a wide range of parents and organisations to ensure that the voice of all of our parents are captured. So if they wish to remain in this space, there will be nothing that prevents them from engaging and being part of our co-production activity and our activity engaging parents as well.
Well, as with Anya sort of paying testament to Sendiacs, I do want to sort of pay testament to HIP. I have to say, like, coming into cabinet when I did, literally coming into lockdown, it was contact with HIP that was incredible, really, for understanding what families need to be, and ensuring that we were reaching out and sort of also getting them to help us. Kind of, you were here at that time.
I was. I remember. So
we very quickly with HIP and with Aswan actually set up a series of FAQs, and it's always been a really productive relationship for me. So I'm extremely grateful, and I just hope we're going to get to a place where it just works better for everyone. I don't want it to be a difficult moment, but change always is quite hard, and I know it's not been easy for everybody.
And would there be resource for the new host organisation?
I don't know.
Well, there'll be resource. I mean, we get a DFE grant and we allocate resources, and our health partners fund them as well. So there'll be proportionate resources in response to the tasks that will be set, but it will be resources from the DFE, local government, and health as well.
Great. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you very much. I think I'm going to bring this item to a close now. Thank you very much for that, Councillor Woodley. Moving on then to item 7, the Children's Social Care Annual Report. The Children's Social Care Annual Report is a standing item on the Commission's work programme. The report could not be taken as scheduled within the work programme. Therefore, the report is published at page 61 of the report pack for members to note. This report details children's social care activity for the period 2021-22. Members are requested to submit questions that they may have about the report in writing to the scrutiny officer, who will then collate these and present them to children and families for a response. These responses will then be published at a future meeting of the Commission, either March or most likely April. Members happy to submit questions by the 4th of March in relation to this. Great, thank you. Then moving on to item 8. Did you want to take this, or was this me, Martin?
Sorry, too quickly.
Yeah.
Okay. This is the main update to the work programme. We've got the planned child key meeting on 28th of March. That looks likely it's going to have to be postponed because the main report coming to that will not be available. But we'll be contacting you this week, just to set what the new day would be, likely to be the 25th of April. Support for young parents is a future item on the 20th of March. That's a number of services are coming to prepare a paper for that. But just in preparation for that meeting, we've got two focus groups on the 6th and 8th of March. We've got space for 1 or 2 members to kind of join the chair and the vice chair on that, if you're interested to kind of come along. The family rights group also come along to that meeting as well as an outside participant as well to give their perspective. The third thing there is around CAMS. We have the focus group with about 6 providers coming, and that's on the 22nd of March. So I think everyone's had the invite now, so that all members are available to come to that to question our CAMS providers ahead of the main meeting. So just get a lot more kind of detailed questioning ahead of the main meeting, so we can get answer some of those preliminary questions as well. So the chair and the vice chair are doing a number of site visits for that, but there's not capacity in terms of site visits to really to take other additional members onto that, unfortunately. Just the other things here around the cabinet update for housing support for care leavers, that's been delayed. That will now go in March, a paper, and we'll get the response to that at the end of next month. And similarly with the childhood food poverty response, that's coming as well, but it's not ready as yet.
Thank you for that, Martin. Moving on to item 9, which is the minutes. The minutes of the meetings held on the 16th of January are attached for members to note and approve. Actions arising from the minutes include outcome from school exclusions, questions unable to be asked at the meeting to receive a written response. These are attached at page 171 of the report pack. Do members have any questions or comments in relation to the responses? No. And then we also have unregistered settings, letter to the Secretary of State for Education for members to review. Unregistered settings, letter to Group Director for Children and Education and Local Leadership for members to review. And City and Hackney Safeguarding Partnership data on attendees of adultification bias training as below and circulated to members. So between July 21 and January 23, the Children and Hackney Safeguarding Children Partnership funded 24 training sessions. A total of 371 practitioners have attended from the following sectors: education, 62, health, 107, local authority, 80, police, 74, with 68 from Metropolitan Police Service, although I'm questioning who the others are, and then 42 from the voluntary sector, and then 6 other. So that's the end of. It
could be the City Police Service.
Yes, maybe. Sorry, I was just curious about who those additional police officers would have been.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, there's, the number of people attending, but what would have been perhaps the expected attendance? It should be good to know. 63 education, how many big issue that has come up, especially in education, and it would be good to understand. Local authority people out of work, out of 100, 100, 300, it would be good to know, and where else needs to be run again.
Yeah, you're right. And I suppose even with education, if you find out that that's from 2 schools, then it's very different to knowing that you've got a small number of people from every school in the borough, for example. So yeah. Do members approve the minutes? Thank you so much. So any other business? The date for the next meeting is the 20th of March, 23. We've got lots to do before then, it seems. 3 weeks, and yeah, we've got loads of focus groups, so within that time.
So I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.